Welcome, everyone. I now call the June 27th, 2023 Special City Council meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The City of Bothell is now providing the option of attending council meetings remotely or in person. Public comment will be allowed both in writing or verbally. Verbal comments may be taken either in person or remotely. Sign-up sheets were provided online by the City Clerk's office via link from the agenda. A call-in phone number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to listen live to the meeting. If you have called in, we ask that you mute your device. If a participant fails to mute their connection and causes a disruption to the meeting, the connection will be terminated. At this point, we'll take a moment to take roll call of the council members by position number. Please say here when the Deputy City Clerk calls your name.
Or the City Clerk.
City Clerk? I just read it.
Councilmember Zorns.
Here.
Mayor Thompson.
Here.
Councilmember Alders.
Here.
Councilmember McNeil.
Here.
Councilmember Mankey.
Here.
Councilmember Dodd.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra.
Here.
All present.
Thank you, City Clerk, with no deputy. Next, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For remote meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And for council attending remotely, use the raise hand feature when you wish to speak. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to presentations, reports, and briefings, starting with public engagement opportunities. We have a 4th of July hometown celebration. You can join us downtown this 4th of July for our annual pancake breakfast, children's parade, and grand parade. You can come to a community meeting with fully inclusive playgrounds. You can learn about the Fully Inclusive Playground Project at the July 15th community meeting taking place in council chambers from 10 a.m. to noon. And after the 4th of July parade, we're starting up our Summer Nights in Bothell from July 14th to August 18th. Save the date for Summer Nights, a 6-week event series featuring music, art, and culture. I'm pretty excited for those. All right, next up, we have recognition for outgoing board and commission members. So tonight we're here to recognize those folks that have served on our boards and commissions that are outgoing, and the following people have served on these boards and commissions, and we thank you very much for your service time and commitment to the Bothell community. We know that there are probably more exciting things that you could be doing with your evening, but instead you choose to make Bothell a better place, and we really appreciate that. We have Katrina Sather and Jill Madison from the Arts Commission, Larry Reed and Julie Gratton from the Landmark Preservation Board, Brittany Caldwell and Laura Lilly from Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, Michael Fan from the Civil Service Commission, David Bain, David Cox, Ann Agard, Patrick Ewing, Carolyn Schaefer, James Orr, and Suzanne Burnell from the Shorelines Board, and I see Ann's with us this evening. And we have Adam Stacy, Richard Molitor, and Vladimir Bedho from the Parks and Recreation Board. And I believe we have Richard and Vladimir here tonight as well. And last but not least, the Library Board. The Library Board was formed on January 1st, 1988, when the City of Bothell was annexed to the King County Library System. And the Library Advisory Board was created to serve as a contact for residents on matters concerning the library. The board served the city in an advisory capacity for the last 35 years. Earlier this year, it was determined that members could better serve the interest of patrons through other activities within KCLS, and the board was dissolved. So tonight, we're here to recognize library board members for their commitment to Bothell. Our most recent board members include Stephanie Adam, Erica Olson, Jessica Chung, Rebecca Birch, Needy Kansal, Sarah Jamaji, and Nadia Mustafa. Erica and Needy are here with us this evening, along with Library Services Manager Alice Darton and previous board members William Root and Laura Escude. We also want to recognize Katie Boyles and Pauline Warden of the King County Library System, as well as all other former library board members who helped foster a welcoming space for our community to learn and connect. Please join me in thanking all of our board and commission members for their service and dedication to our city. Because of you, Bothell's a better place. And we are going to recess. It's 6:04 right now. We are going to recess until 6:20, and we've got some cake. Join us. Welcome back. We got a little bit of a thinned out group. It's the diehards here now. I am going to go to the city manager report. It's up next on the agenda. City manager?
All right. There's lots of things that are hard to follow. Cake break, that's going to make the list. Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, City Council. I have quite a few updates tonight, so I'll try and move quickly. But a lot of good things. Seems like 30 minutes ago that we were talking about what are the upcoming events, and one of the ones was for the 4th of July, and really thinking about the council vision for Bothell and where we want to be is that for a day or for a lifetime, no matter who you are or where you're from, Bothell is everyone's hometown, and certainly our 4th of July is an opportunity of being able to practice that hometown feel. So wanted to share with council really quick just a shout out and a thank you to our staff who make it safe for people to be here for the 4th of July as well. I had the opportunity to attend a safety meeting with members of our police department, our Parks and Recreation Department, and our Public Works Department as they were preparing for how to set up for having 20,000 visitors line our parade route and again do it safely. So I'm extremely grateful. I know last year I was had been here about 2 weeks when that event took place and was really I knew it was a lot of staff work, but as you walk the parade route and you see the number of staff who are at the intersections and making sure that people have the information they need, people are hydrated, and people are staying safe, and cars are staying off the parade route unless they're supposed to be there. Just a lot of gratitude. So I wanted to open tonight with just a thank you to the team of people who will be working on the morning of the 4th of July. Secondly, speaking of the parade, a number of you may have already seen it in our community that today the Grand Marshal was unveiled officially online and on social media. So just by way of background, Council may recall that this year, while the Grand Marshal is not a new thing for a parade, the process of getting there this year was a little bit different. So there was a public call for nominations, and that was back in March through early May. Staff did a quick check because there were some criteria of what you need to meet, and also making sure anyone nominated actually wanted to be the Grand Marshal, because not everybody wants to be in the parade. Some people want to be on the side of the parade, like city managers. And so really thankful, though, for the work there. All the applications then of people who said they wanted to be in it were then reviewed by, there was 3 staff members, and they were joined by a Parks Board member and a member of the Arts Commission to have a community view on this. And the panel reviewed and independently scored and then compared notes. And really happy to say then that a familiar name, Heather Heyer, was selected to serve as the Grand Marshal this year. There was a lot of great applicants, and again, just one of those wonderful moments of remembering that there's a lot of people who care about this community and have been recognized for the great work they've done. So more information about Heather is on the website for the 4th of July page, and we're really excited to have her lead the parade. So a little later in the day for 4th of July, as you know, it'll get dark, and then there will be fireworks. And so just wanted to do a quick reminder of that with the 4th of July approaching, in the Bothell community, or in the municipal code, fireworks are illegal with some exceptions in Bothell. So we've been doing our best to remind staff. I think thinking of the safety meeting that I was at, the briefing that I mentioned, one of the great reminders for all public safety is that we want to spend more time planning and getting word out ahead of time as opposed to responding. So this is part of that. And there's also been, in the citywide mailer that went out a couple of weeks ago, there's been a news flash in the page, email to the full list of people who subscribe to the city's mailing list. It's been on Facebook, Nextdoor, Twitter, etc. So just a reminder. There's also, though, an opportunity for people who want to put something in their yards. In the lobby of City Hall, there is a yard sign available for those who are still in the audience. If you want one for your yard, they're out in the lobby. These have been posted around town, and I think even some of our police officers have them if somebody wants to flag them down and say, hey, do you have something for my yard? There's also electronic signs with a message flashing just off of 405 at Beardsley and on Bothell Everett Highway as well. So trying to get the word out there. Couple things then just to also remind, we'll have reminders at the pancake breakfast and at the parade as well. So again, bottom line, the goal with that is that we want everyone to have a great celebration, be able to celebrate with family and friends. There's some great fireworks displays in the area. There will still be fireworks over Bothell, I'm sure too, but just want to remind everybody to be safe and have a great 4th. A couple more updates. So also on social media, and folks may have seen, but just recently King County launched an open house called the Sammamish River Capital Investment Strategy, or the Sammamish River CIS. And there's an open house going on with comment. And I think when it first went out, the deadline to respond to the survey was July 10th. I see it's already been extended to July 31st. So there's a lot of great feedback that King County is looking for, primarily around river management practices and keeping them up to date with current regulations. They're planning for future conditions and potentially some projects to help keep the river healthy. The strategy will also look at flood risks and protecting fish and wildlife habitat throughout the corridor. So really want to encourage people to go out, take that survey. If they don't, there's links on the city's website and on social media, but also if you go out to your favorite search engine and search for Sammamish River CIS project, that'll come up. Lastly, a little bit of a more recent thing. Last night at the North Shore School District meeting, the school board took a vote. So public meetings happening other days of the week in Bothell. And it was to authorize the superintendent of schools to pursue an interlocal agreement with the city of Bothell for school resource officer services for the next school year at Bothell High School. So just wanted to update the council on that. We have not received anything from the school district yet. That was the first step, was to direct the superintendent to do that. The school board has asked for the superintendent to return. The targeted date is August 14th. With a interlocal agreement for them to consider. So I did speak with Superintendent Tolley yesterday. He was informing me of that, and that they will be, his team is going to be reaching out to negotiate what the services look like. Again, we've had an interlocal agreement in place, but there's been recent law change of looking at this annually and some different requirements. So we'll be making sure to pull that together. As the service provider, that's what our police department's here to do. So they'll be negotiating with them. The school board does anticipate taking action on it on August 14th. And then with council recess in August, the first council meeting that we would have to bring it for you to consideration, because interlocal agreements do require council approval. We'll be targeting for September 5th, which is also the first day of school. So just want to also, for the council's knowledge and also for any community confusion of making sure, the good news is that this is not a new service or an unanticipated service. There might be some changes to how the service is delivered, and that's part of the negotiation. But our school resource officer will be retained, will be available. We will plan on having them at Bothell High School on the first day of school. And again, with the interlocal agreement, we'll, as a service provider, we want to make sure that that's in place. And at the same time, it's ultimately council's decision on whether or not the ILA gets approved. So we can adjust with that too, but we'll proceed with the assumption that we want to provide service on the first day of school. We'll bring it to council. We'll get that closed up and answer any questions at that time. So in the meantime, there may be some briefings or updates, but we're going to proceed with negotiations. So with that, a pretty lengthy list, I'll close the city manager report for tonight.
All right, next up, we've got council committee reports. All right, the city has accepted visitor comment. Oh, did you?
Yeah, I was waiting for one of my colleagues to jump in. Almost always has one, so I didn't want to get in front. But the Snohomish County Law and Justice Committee met today. We discussed electronic home monitoring, which is a program that the county shut down back in 2015 for budgetary reasons. But we're taking a look at this to see if it's something we might want to re-implement. More to come, but that's all I've got for today.
Thank you, Councilmember Mankey. All right. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing, as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to the city clerk no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all city council members and are part of the record. When the clerk calls your name, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that council will receive your input, but on the advice of our city attorney, we do not engage in discussion of these topics. Staff will make note of items requiring follow-ups. City Clerk, do we have anybody signed up?
We do, Mayor Thompson, thank you. Before we begin, I'd like to remind commenters that while you may speak to whatever topic you choose, we ask that if you are a council candidate, you do not use this time to speak to your own campaign. With that, we received 3 written comments. The first one was from Bothell Police Dispatch, who wrote in regarding the closure of Bothell's PD Communication Center and the laying off of 11 employees. Joanne Harkonnen wrote in regarding the temporary closure of Main Street between 101st and 102nd. And Mark Swanson wrote regarding displaced wildlife in Bothell and the transportation improvement plan. And then we have 2 people signed up to speak this evening. The first one is Dwayne Bowman. So Mr. Bowman, if you want to take us up to the podium right there, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. We'll set the timer and it will be green and then flash yellow when you get to 30 seconds. And could you hit the button on the microphone? Here, I'll help you.
There we
There
go.
you go. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Bothell City Council, Mayor Thompson. My name is Dwayne Bowman. I'm here to speak briefly on 2 topics. The first topic is the crosswalk located at 226th Street Southwest and 9th Avenue North near Cedar Grove Park and the Crystal Ridge neighborhood. Over 3 years ago, we were told that this crosswalk would be receiving the switch-activated lights to inform drivers of pedestrians crossing the street. That's those yellow flashing lights. There are 2 crosswalks on 9th Avenue. 9th Avenue is a collector street that connects 2 major arterials, 524 to the north and 228 to the south. And it is used as a bypass for the Bothell Everett Highway. You go on 9th Avenue, I challenge anybody to come out there in the morning or in the evening and watch the traffic going through there. And it goes way faster than 35. We were told that was going to happen. That never did happen. Then last year, we were told that the lights were scheduled to be installed this year. So I'm here to ask, is this true? And if it's not, I encourage the council to address this dangerous crosswalk. 9th Avenue, as I said, is a collector between 2 major arterials. It is quite often, I use that crosswalk every morning. I go for a 4-mile walk every morning, and I have to use that crosswalk. And I'm doing it during the peak hour. And often I'm either in the middle of that crosswalk with cars going through it while I'm in it, or I have to wait for 8 to 10 cars to get through it. The other crosswalk that is on 9th Avenue is located in front of the Crystal Springs Elementary School, and it does have a light, and it needs it. So that's my concern. And I also need to point out that crosswalk is also a bus stop. That's where the kids are picked up in the morning and dropped off in the afternoon. It's frightening to watch the cars going through there with the kids there. It's particularly bad in the winter when it's dark. The second item that I have, and I know you're not going to address that tonight. You have all my contact information, and you can, the appropriate staff can let me know what's going on. The second item deals with Cedar Grove Park and the damage to the green belt that was done by park staff. I don't know if the council's been to that park, but the area along 9th Avenue frontage is basically a green belt area. It kind of separates that park, kind of makes it the park is set back and it's screened off from that busy road. But recently, one of the park's maintenance staff people seems to have made the decision that it's okay to clear along the stream there, and they butchered the green belt along that stream.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. I'm sorry your time is up.
That's fine.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mark Swanson.
I don't know why the parking's so bad around here. I thought we had the planning commission hiring consultants to take a look before we built all this stuff that we weren't going to have any parking problems. So here we got, what did we spend the tens of thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on consultant firms only to wind up with too many apartments and no parking? Now we got to deal with it? Why? It should have been done a long time ago. So I'd like to say that we got to make sure that we have outcome measurements like Council Member McNeil talks about. It's important. I put up a bunch of wind turbines with my partner back in year 2000, Mariah Energy Group, actually. I'll tell you something about wind turbines. They only operate 27% of the time. The rest of the time, they're just sitting still. Problem with that is that you got to balance out the grid, which means you got to put up single cycle gas turbines, fast start, to spool up to balance the grid out. You can't do it with the big one. The problem with single cycle is that they're only 25% efficient. So here's the little dirty secret. For every wind turbine you see out there, there's a corresponding gas turbine that's operating at only 25% efficiency. Every wind turbine you see out there is actually putting out more CO2 than it avoids. Power loss in lines is current squared times resistance. Teslas, or any electric car at a 220 volt charging station, 3.3 kilowatt hours per hour. So a house only uses typically 1,200 kilowatt hours a month. Well, if we start charging 2 of these Teslas a household, or even 1, we're probably looking at about a 40% increase in the amount of currents that's going through our existing lines. Now, the way it works, I squared times the resistance, that's the power loss. If we go up 40% in our current, we've got to double the lines, put up a separate line completely, double the copper overhead, and that's just for a 40% increase. The city of Seattle, they've made it illegal to have natural gas fires and heaters. I got news for you. Your natural gas heaters, they run at 95% efficiency. If you turn that into electricity, you just cut off 45, 55, maybe even 65% of your efficiency. It's the worst thing you can do. There's a reason why these natural gas heaters are all 90% plus efficiency, and why you don't want to go to electric. EVs are worse than gas cars. I sent you that information. Review it, please. And gas cars are better than buses, and buses are worse than all of them. The worst thing you want is inner-city buses. If you think about it, please watch my Cobalt video. That needs to be addressed. No electric vehicles in this place.
Thank you,
No electric buses.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. That's all I have, Mayor Thompson.
Mayor, really quick, I want to just address it. It appears that Zoom had frozen during public comment, but I did verify on YouTube everything was streaming. I'll look to the deputy city. It looks like everything's back up and running, but if we need to, if there are any issues in the future, in the remaining of the meeting, we can always take a break. So.
Okay, sounds good. All right, next up is projected agenda discussion. Does anybody have something they would like to discuss adding to the agenda in the future? All right. Moving on to the consent agenda. I'd love to hear a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, I got a motion from Deputy Mayor Alcabra and a second from Councilmember Dodd to approve the consent agenda. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? All right, seeing none, City Clerk.
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Alders?
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil?
Yes.
Councilmember Menke?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you, City Clerk. All right, next up, we've got Agenda Bill 23101, the Arts Commission appointment. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, this is one item for action tonight, and it'll be led by our city clerk, Laura Hathaway. Just a little background and reminder, earlier this spring in March, council did a series of appointments of vacancies to various boards and commissions. We've had one resignation on the Arts Commission since that time, so this is outside of the regular appointment process, but since there was some the conversation was pretty recent. We're back tonight to have a conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura Hathaway to lead council through next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Stannard. Yes, so Kyle said it. Basically, we had a resignation very shortly after we conducted the interviews. So we decided to forego re-interviewing we reached out to the 3 applicants that were qualified to fill this, and they were all 3 interested. We decided to forego the interviews, and you got their applications as part of your packet materials. And because this is a board and commission appointment, we do it by written ballot. And so you each have one in front of you, and we will, if you would circle the one person, we'll see if we get a appointee. And then once we do, we ask that you make a motion to ratify the vote. So we'll collect those. And if we have to go more than one round, we will. That is my report. Any questions? Okay, great. We'll collect those. Thank you.
Yeah, we've done this before.
We needed a majority vote for a majority of the council members here. So Kavithia, what's her last name? Nandy has been appointed. So if I could get a motion to ratify that, we will contact her and let her know that she's been appointed to the Arts Commission.
Councilmember Dodd?
I move to ratify the council vote to appoint Kavitha Nandi to the open seat on the Arts Commission.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Dodd and a second from Councilmember Alders. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Alders?
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil?
Yes.
Councilmember Menke?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Yes.
Passes 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you, City Clerk. All right, we are going to take a break because our next agenda item is a study session here in Chambers. It is 6:49. We will break until 7 o'clock p.m. That'll give us 10 minutes to get things set up.
Eat more cake.
Is our next one, and I'm going to turn it over to the city manager and get it started.
Perfect. And we only have one study session tonight, but it is a meaty one. So just for a little context as we head into tonight, we are going to be having a conversation about the transportation element of the Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan 2024 update. So this is probably the first real significant touch on one of the comp plan elements that we'll see. There's 4 parts, and there will be a break in between to make sure that you don't have to hold all your feedback and discussion until the end. But I'm sure you're going to hear that again too from our folks that are navigating us through. I'm going to turn things over at this time though to our Community Development Director, Jason Greenspan, to lead off with some background and introduce the team.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor Thompson, City Council members. As mentioned, we're here to discuss the transportation element of the comprehensive plan this evening. Leading the presentation and discussion tonight is Steve Morikawa, our Deputy Director of Public Works and City Engineer, and Carmen Kwan, our lead consultant from Fair & Peers. Tonight, we're asking the City Council to provide staff with feedback regarding the scope and approach of the transportation element topics, specifically related to safety, transportation system resiliency, and what we refer to as multimodal level of service. We initiated the comprehensive plan update process earlier this year as required under the Growth Management Act, and we've identified high-level focus areas, some of which are pretty fundamental, like growth projections for housing and employment. What are some of the efficient and equitable ways to meet our growth projections, and engaging and mitigating the impacts of our changing climate and finding pathways to adapt. In May, we had a discussion with the Planning Commission and City Council on how to approach the comprehensive plan guiding principles, which are going to serve as a blueprint for the city's future. Now, one long-standing principle that relates directly to multimodal nature of transportation is from our current 2015 plan. And this is a direct quote from our existing Imagine Bothell comprehensive plan. We are a city that develops and maintains a transportation system which serves land use and conservation goals with a variety of motorized and non-motorized modes of travel, placing emphasis on each so as to maximize individual choice. Now, emphasizing choice is really key when it comes to transportation, maximizing the variety of available options for all community members, choosing to walk, to bike, drive alone, carpool, take an Uber, take a bus. We want to expand the variety of choices available to all Bothell residents into our workforce. This is going to help us maximize our infrastructure investments, improve our air quality, enhance our safety, and ease congestion on our roadways. So tonight, Stephen Carmen will talk in some level of detail about updating the transportation element, and you'll hear about how we want to assess mobility through a slightly refined lens. And the goal tonight is to get your feedback on our draft transportation priorities. We have a new and renewed focus on people, how to move people and the goods that they need within our city and region by choosing a variety of transportation modes. We don't want to structure our discussion only about cars and expanding roadways for cars. Also, transportation priorities correlate directly to our land use policies. For example, how we can lessen the distance between where people live and where they work and reduce miles traveled in vehicles. We plan to discuss land use with the City Council next month, and talking tonight about multimodal transportation is really going to help set the stage for that. With that, I'll hand over to you, Steve.
So good evening. As Director Greenspan indicated, we'd like to discuss the transportation element with you. We had a study session with the Planning Commission on June 7th on these topics, and we will also share their input as we go along. So as Director Greenspan indicated, Carmen and I were going to tag team. Rayed Tirhi would typically do the resiliency part, but I'm going to bat up for him, I guess. We'll be covering 5 topics, and we're kind of early in our update process, so a lot of the content is kind of to let you know what we're going to do or what we are doing. We have hopefully get a head nod on the direction we're going, and we do have a lot of work ahead of us. Most of our work is still ahead of us. Let's see. So these are the 5 things we're going to cover. First, Carmen will provide you with an overview of the overall transportation element update process. I'll walk you through the draft transportation priorities, and then we're going to pause there and gather some feedback on the priorities, answer any questions you have on the process. Then Carmen's going to introduce you to multimodal level of service, MMLOS. I keep telling everybody, remember that an acronym. And then she's going to address safety, and then I'll pinch hit for Rayed and talk about transportation system resilience. And then we'll pause again, and we can talk about those 3 topics if you have questions or anything. Keep wanting to press that button. So the first thing I kind of want to do before we dive in is kind of relate the council's city vision to the work that we're doing with the transportation element. So this is something community development came up with the 7 areas of the vision. And transportation is actually involved in some way in a number of those 7 elements, such as when you talk about connecting neighborhoods, that's transportation, even if it's not a vehicular connection, it could be a pedestrian or bike connection. Or supporting economic vitality. We got to move freight and we got to deliver goods so that small businesses or even large businesses can still run. There are 2 areas of heavier focus, though. The first one being, and it seems pretty clear, moving in and around Bothell. We will be addressing safety in the update, and Carmen will describe that in more detail later. We will at least start the discussion and set policies regarding things like circulator bus and micromobility. So one of the things I have to keep reminding some of our staff in at least the public works side is we have great vision and we want to do all these things at once, but we may not have the time to do all the implementation while we're doing the planning work. So sometimes we may have to set a policy that says, you know, you're going to address this in the future in this manner, and then we will implement later. So that's one of the things that's difficult about this. But I'm pretty excited because we are having conversations, as an example, with the transit agencies, and that's a good place to start talking about circulator buses. And micromobility, it's also a good place for first and last mile. So the other one that we're kind of we're impactful potentially, and hopefully not, is environmental stewardship. So in terms of this, we're approaching it with a multimodal approach, and we'll have in the development of a transportation system that tries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But also, when we go through and look at our projects and how we wind up with projects, we want to look at it so that we're least impactful on the environment, smallest footprint we can do, make sure we know what kind of area we're going through, steep slopes, critical areas, that kind of thing. So first, let's start with Carmen and the transportation element process.
Thanks, Steve. Again, my name is Carmen Kwan. I'm with Fair and Peers, and I've been hired by the city to support the update to the transportation element. Next slide. So I first wanted to go over the kind of high-level process for updating the transportation element. We've got a flow chart graphic up on the screen here, and we're kind of in the first two tiles. So we're documenting existing conditions right now, and then we'll be evaluating future land use scenarios over the summer. Going into the fall, we'll be identifying potential project prioritization metrics, and identifying potential projects that are needed to support growth in the city over the next 20 years. Once we go through the project prioritization process, we will also be going through a funding assessment. So we need to identify what's feasible in terms of funds for the next 20 years to help develop a 20-year project list that's reasonable. And we'll be developing and updating policies for the transportation element this fall through the end of the year. So I think that's all in a process to have an adopted comprehensive plan by the end of 2024. Throughout this process, we'll be meeting periodically with Planning Commission and City Council to talk about the status of the project. And then we will also be going through public engagement process for this project to get community feedback at key points. Next slide. So we have tiles here of, in more detail, scope items for the transportation element itself. We are creating a customized travel demand model for the city of Bothell to forecast demand for various land use scenarios over the summer. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be going through, once we develop a prioritized project list, we'll also be looking at developing more detailed cost estimates and conceptual layouts for projects that have met our 20-year criteria. As part of the policy update and review, that'll happen late this summer, and I think that will address some of the items that Steve had mentioned earlier, which is micromobility and circulator shuttles. And we are going through an environmental impact statement process for this for the comprehensive plan, so we will be documenting the transportation chapter for that as well. Next. So potential public engagement ideas that we have planned for the project is a public survey. So we'll be developing an online website for people to provide comments on the draft transportation priorities that Steve will be getting to in the next section. And then we'll also have a web map of the city of Bothell. So the public will have the opportunity to drop a pin and provide any comments they feel are relevant to the transportation element that can be related to safety concerns or near-miss accidents, mobility challenges, or specific desired improvements they'd like to see in the system. It'll also be an opportunity to inform the public about transportation system resiliency and to get feedback in that area. Next slide. So I'll hand it over to Steve.
Sorry. So one of the things that staff recognizes can become confusing, and because it happens to us as well, is use of terminology. So it happens even more so because a certain term can be used in a very specific manner, especially in engineering, and sometimes it's used broadly as in the general public. So please let us know if you need clarification on any use of the term, and that helps us when we write our priorities so that people understand. We're very clear on what the priorities and what that specific thing means. So here's a couple definitions as an example. The comprehensive plan, which is Bothell's policy document that sets forth the policies for the community's future development, will describe how transportation priorities fit in the transportation element update process. As Director Greenspan indicated, all of the elements of the plan, of which transportation is just one, are part of a whole. And so priorities may look and probably should look similar to the overall priorities. The transportation really should be part of the whole. Keeping that in mind, Fern Pierce charged city staff with drafting 4 to 6 transportation priorities for the transportation element. It wasn't easy. We wound up with 6, not 4. And we hope you also see that they should really reflect the overall comprehensive plan goals. Prioritization metrics, these are based on the priorities. It's how the project team will evaluate project ideas developed as part of the transportation element to determine how the city should prioritize them. They will ultimately be used to help evaluate individual projects. Constrained project list, and the key word here is constrained because it is financially constrained what we can do in 20 years, and unfortunately that's the reality we work with and we have to plan for. I would also say don't only think about projects, but programs as well. So projects we tend to think of as one-time expenditures of capital funds, and then you maintain it in the future. Programs can be things like transportation demand management, which occur over a period of years, and are not resulting necessarily in some sort of physical object, but they have a goal in mind. So think about it as projects and programs. Again, the city unfortunately will have a set amount of resources to expend over a 20-year planning period, so the list of transportation projects and programs that will eventually be identified to be completed within those years will be constrained by our available resources. And again, it's a 20-year document, but remember, we have opportunities to amend that. So if we are doing better, we can accommodate that, and if we need to somehow do something to change to catch up, we can also address those things as well. But it's a long-term plan. So performance measures is the last thing. In late fall, we will be evaluating future year land use scenarios and figure out how to support them with the transportation system. That's what our modeling is for. We will do this in a manner that helps us achieve our goals, which is primarily to create a multiple modal system with many transportation choices. So then we have a list of projects and programs that will, in theory, get us there. And performance measures will help us evaluate how the city will monitor those priorities over time to ensure that we're accomplishing our goals. So an example of this is kind of like when we did our Canyon Park sub-area plan. One of the goals was to implement transportation demand management, which Carmen was a big part of. And that helps, that accounts for a certain number of trips. Well, we have to measure that over time because you want to make sure that those are actually working. If it's not working, then your system gets strained. So, as I mentioned, we drafted 6 transportation priorities. These are in your packet along with a few actions under each priority that would help us achieve them. What we're looking for from council is whether we're headed in the right direction, that things, like if we're missing anything important or if you feel we're not clear in statements. Staff can gather your input, combine it with what we heard from the Planning Commission, and then refine the priorities. So let me read through all 6. So, provide a safe and efficient multimodal transportation system that moves people and goods. Ensure Bothell is a safe and desirable place to live, work, learn, visit, and play. Encourage growth in Bothell in an equitable manner. Leverage the highest value from Bothell's transportation system while minimizing environmental impacts. Invest in growth that is smart, strategic, and sustainable. And develop and support a resilient transportation system. So let me show you what the Planning Commission kind of came up with. So in priority number 1, under the subheading B, you can see the light blue, build a connected network that offers low stress and accessible options for people walking, rolling, and using micromobility. One thought would be to put that actually in item C, part of complete streets, because they felt that it didn't quite fit with the transit. It was more of talking about alternative means of transportation, active means. And then the other idea was strive for complete streets and to specify including walking and cycling. So under item 3, encourage growth in Bothell in an equitable manner. There was a suggestion in specifying consideration of disabled and those with limited mobility specifically, call it out. And there was a kind of a question, maybe a suggestion, can consideration be made to include consideration of all impacts, including noise and pollutants, on people living near arterials? And then the last one, which goes back to the terminology, which is very interesting. We use the word sustainable, and that can mean many things. So pointed out that what was that meaning, and it was financially sustainable. So we would add that word there. So at this point, I think we would pause, and if we have any questions on the process that we're going to go through for the transportation element, and specifically, we would like to hear feedback on the priorities, we can do that. And I can bring up the priorities if you're going to talk about specific ones. So I'm going to escape, and I'm going to run through this a little bit. And I can start at number 1, I think. Center works. Let's see. Yeah. So that's the first priority with the subsets in there.
Well, I just want to start off by saying that was the first time I've seen the city vision priorities graphic, and that is really well done. It's very simple and clear. I love how it kind of flows into each other, and I think that was very thoughtfully put together, and it looks like a really good guide for the work that you're doing. So first I want to say that's fantastic. And then I did also have a question about the public engagement. I really appreciated hearing the interactive map. That's going to be really cool, especially we've been looking for a way to talk about near misses and for people to report that. My guess is that we're going to be using the public engagement platform that Sarah Frost has set up, and that would be how people plug into this. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the plan.
That's going to be fantastic. I can't wait until that is like populated with, several opportunities to provide engagement and feedback to the city all the time. And I know new things can kind of cycle in and out of there. And this is going to be a really great way of giving that space. Sorry. But then looking at these priorities, if you could actually go back to the slide that lists all 6 of them, I think that'd be helpful.
I don't have one that lists all 6.
I thought you did.
Oh, I see, just the titles. Sorry about that.
Just the titles, yeah.
Got it. I'm going to go back quite a bit. That one.
That one, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think that these are fantastic. I kind of get the sense that you may have pulled some of these from our vision document and just said, that's a good, however you did that, I think it was really well done. And I do agree specifically on number 5 that changing that heading to be financially sustainable gives it more focus, that it's clearly about economics and not environment. So that's the feedback I have so far, but thank you for bringing this to us. This looks really great.
Can I jump in with a question/comment? One, have you done it? And 2, is it possible to measure or get an estimate of how much traffic that's on our streets are people who are traveling through Bothell, people who are coming into Bothell to work, people who live in Bothell? Is it possible to know how much vehicular traffic how it breaks down?
There are data sources available to identify approximately how much traffic on, say, Bothell Everett Highway is traveling through the area just to go north to Mill Creek versus staying or traveling within Bothell.
Okay.
There's also travel models that can kind of estimate that information.
Pretty reliably, I'm hoping.
The model is typically developed to represent the peak hours. So I
Okay.
think that's probably your best bet in terms of referring to the model for that.
Okay. Because I know our state routes, 522, 527, those get dollars that are outside of what Bothell has to pay and cover for. But the reality is, Bothell is also a cut-through city that traffic goes through. And we had someone give testimony today about taking 9th instead of Bothell Everett Highway. I'm guilty. I do that anytime Bothell Everett Highway is busy. I'm going down 9th. I won't put you guys on the spot to know who else does that. But I don't know as a city if we want to discourage that kind of cut-through traffic and what that would look like. Maybe more stop signs, more flashing crosswalks. Maybe that would discourage it, but it's all wear and tear on our roads of cars that are needing and vehicles that are needing to move through Bothell. And I guess in this transportation that our first priority is the people of Bothell and the businesses of Bothell. That's our first priority in our investment. But the reality is we have people who use Bothell to cut through, and I don't know how much does that figure into our plan here, I guess is the question that I took a very long way to get to.
So getting to the more technical work that I'll be doing for the transportation element is we are creating, like I mentioned, that travel model for the city of Bothell, and it does include the rest of the region in the Puget Sound.
Okay.
So when we look at our future year scenarios, 2044, we are not only allocating growth within the city of Seattle, or city of Bothell, but also everywhere else in the region, including Seattle. So we will be able to take into consideration some of that regional through traffic in our analysis.
Okay, so now I have another question. There's such a thing as too many cooks in the kitchen, but we have all these wonderful summertime events coming, and do we want to welcome input from people who are just coming into Bothell for our summer events on what they would like to see for moving through Bothell? Or do we just not want to open that?
We are going to have a presence at our summer events, trying to engage the community in the comprehensive planning process. We've started with some pretty simple questions about what makes Bothell special, and I suspect we're going to hear a variety of opinions about what makes Bothell special. It'd be interesting to see how much gravitates towards transportation and how convenient destinations are, how easy it is to get from home to work, things like that. So we are going to leverage those events.
Okay, and it won't matter whether the people offering opinions are call Bothell home or not? Or are you going to try to filter that?
Well, we are asking when someone wants to provide input through our portal that they register and provide us with an email address, and we don't specify that you must be a resident of Bothell. We just ask for information so that you have some accountability when you're providing input. There may be a way for us to figure out how many people are actually in our zip codes, but I can look into that a little bit more.
I know you have a cumbersome project, and I don't want to make it more clunky than it is, but there are people who use Bothell who don't call Bothell home, and do we want their opinions on navigating through Bothell or not? I don't know. That's just a question I'm tossing out there.
So if I could, I heard a few questions in there I'd like to try to address. So outside traffic, coming from outside, going through Bothell and going outside Bothell again. So one of the things we could do when we look at policies, and it could already be in there, is how you what do you advocate for in terms of road projects? So as an example, it's interesting, they call the model a gravity model. And essentially, it's like a pipe system. So if you squeeze the pipe, the traffic's got to go somewhere else. So if you think about it, we have several different scale of roadways. We have I-405 going north-south. We have 527 and the old 527 Bothell Way. And then we have north-south roads like 9th Avenue, 35th Avenue, okay? So they're all part of the system. And if one is not carrying capacity, then they try to go to the other. So one thing we could do is advocate and make sure the improvements to I-405, such as finishing the express toll lanes between 527 and Linwood, we make sure that's in the policy because we take care of that. And if we take care of that, some of the traffic that we'll try to cut through because I-405 is slower won't show up on 527, and because 527 is held up now, they go on to 9th. So those are the kinds of things we can do and write in our policies to make sure we understand what we're advocating for and why, I think. The other thing you mentioned up is, are they paying, I assume you meant grants and federal grants and things, and state grants for anything other than state routes. We can get funding, and we do get funding for things outside of 527 and 522 and 524. They typically don't compete as well because they're not as large capacity projects. But as an example, we will go after federal grants for 9th Avenue multimodal project, which would, it's a 3-lane road. It's a minor arterial. It'll have bike lanes and sidewalks. So it's not a 527. So it won't compete as well. But if we can sell it and write it up enough, it could compete well enough that we do get federal and state grants. So I think there is opportunity there, and I think that's kind of how we should look at it. Because the reality is we're not going to get rid of that traffic. They have to go through somewhere. And, even myself coming to Bothell, I pass through several cities, and I kind of have to get to Bothell. So unfortunately, that's kind of the reality.
Thank you. Super excited to see this evolve. I did have a question about the public engagement. So I noticed a survey, the web map, love the web map for the reasons that Councilmember Aldrich's talked about. But those are both digital. And I would love to see us get out to people who are using our transportation systems because we're just not going to hit a lot of people, enough people, I think, just advertising things digitally. I would love to see us and I'm going to throw these out there and you can tell me they're impossible. And this is just my first draft. So please do not think we got to figure this out, but be at our park and rides, Canyon Park, Bothell, right? Find people who are walking up to the buses, and just have a very nice looking booth, maybe some free coffee if it's the morning or whatever. And talk to people who are using our transportation systems, find people at big active crossings and just, I don't know what kind of sign or way that you can make it obvious that we would love to talk to you. Here's a cookie. How was your walk to this part of your journey? Right. Or ride the 105 and the 120 and be like, hey, City of Bothell person, would love to talk to you. I'm just where people are when they're taking that, especially if it happens a couple of times, so that if they see you and they're like, no, I'm good. And then a few weeks later, they're like, oh, I did have a problem. And then they can talk to you about that. I wonder about the people we're missing if we just have those two digital options and how we can get to people who, I think sometimes people don't have a big enough complaint that they want to go find the way to make the complaint. But if you catch them while they're there and they're like, well, actually, I just almost got hit by a car crossing this road, and once they calm down, they're like, whatever, that happens. But it'd be good to know about that stuff. So I would love to look at other feedback and mechanisms without also, I appreciate spending years trying to get all the feedback that you could possibly get. So yeah, that was good. And I just wanted to appreciate the inclusion of rolling on the methods that people get around. My dad recently discovered freedom with an electric wheelchair, and now he rolls up and down 228th to get to places. And he's had a lot of feedback that he has passed to me, his very hyper-local live-in council member. So it's good to see that, because there's stuff like a missing curb cut can really just mean you're riding your wheelchair in the road if you can't get on the sidewalk. So that's great.
Takes public comment to a whole new level, right? In terms of the priorities, I have just a couple things. Just before I get started, like I love where we're going, and I really appreciate the work that's been done. We like in the priorities we say multimodal, and I love the direction that we're going, but I don't necessarily love the word because that has a tendency to mean everything but cars when we use it and when we talk about it. And I feel like we should be explicit that we want people to safely and efficiently get around in whichever manner they choose. Not that we are prioritizing one over the other. We're trying to make sure we have a system where one can, take whatever method of transportation they feel like and do it safely. I don't know what that would look like. I don't have a suggestion right off the top of my head. But when I think you mentioned sustainable and like, what does that mean? And I kind of feel the same way for efficiency as well. And they might mean very similar things. I like to think of it from 3 points of view: moving people and goods through space. What does that the most efficiently? Financial, both near and long term, and then climate pollution. I love the Planning Commission's suggestion to consider all impacts, including people who live near arterials. Asthma rates of kids who grow up near arterials and near highways are way higher. And I think that's something that we should look at in our transportation planning. I love the question that Councilmember Zorns asked about where traffic is coming from. I don't know if that's in the scope of what we're talking about right now, but I would love to know where traffic is coming from, especially as we talk about growth and traffic. I suspect that when we push growth out, people still have to drive all the way through Bothell. They end up driving more because they live farther away from where they'd like to be. And traffic's just people driving cars. And when they drive farther, there's more traffic. So if there's a way to test that, if there's a way to know like where the traffic is coming from and how much of it is coming from people who live here, I'd love to know that. The other thing that Councilmember Zorn said that I really liked is prioritizing like people who live here and deprioritize people being able to conveniently drive through the city on our city-maintained roads. I would much prefer them to use the state highways that somebody else pays to maintain. So kind of what you were saying, Steve, about that earlier. That is the feedback I have on the priorities.
Can I just jump in and kind of add to what other council members have said? When we're talking about moving people through Bothell who don't live here, I like to think about it from the perspective of those who work here. That's an important frame. Sure, there's lots of people who are coming through Bothell because they, live somewhere else and work somewhere else. But I'd also like to think of it in terms of the people who work in Bothell. Where are they coming from? And also, I'm curious, like, what percentage of Bothell workers are at lower AMI? I'd be curious to know 80% and below. We do know that evidence shows that people at lower AMIs generally tend to have to commute further to their jobs, because especially if they're priced out of the community that they work in. And so I'd like to understand also what their commutes are like. Where are they coming from? How are they getting here? What kind of impact is that having on their quality of life, their health, their income? So that's, like, I appreciate what my other council members are saying here, but I also want to kind of add that frame of Bothell workers. And sure, does that also connect into housing? Absolutely. Why are so many people who work in Bothell coming from elsewhere? It's because they're priced out of our community. And I'd like to understand how much that housing inaccessibility is impacting our traffic patterns. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad we're having the conversation. Look forward to continuing. A couple questions around the DEI, GMA growth allocations and stuff. How are we measuring impacts on DEI? Just making sure that as we continue to have the conversation, we understand how we're looking at DEI in this conversation. We talk about growth, GMA, growth targets, growth allocations. What are those allocations, and making sure that those are part of the conversations? I'm sure they're going to be, but just making sure that they are. The weight of people who live in Bothell. I think Councilmember Zorn's brought it up. A couple other council members brought it up after, but I think that's an important conversation to have of how are we weighting the people in the survey that actually live here versus those who live outside of our community. We want to pay attention to both. I think it's important for us to be great regional partners when it comes to transportation, both in and out and around our community, because if we want to be able to bring grant dollars back into our community, I think we've proven in the past that we need to be great partners regionally. So I think it's important that we understand, and weigh both equally, but making sure that we understand how those who live in the community, work in the community, what their needs are, I think is important as well. Travel patterns, I've heard that many times over the past few years about peak hours versus off-peak hours, and understanding how people move in and around the community during peak hours, whether they're coming through Bothell or going out of Bothell, and then more importantly, off-peak hours. What does that look like, and how are people traveling? Because if we ask a question, how do are you going to be able to go to a football field, or are you going to be able to go to the grocery store, and how are you traveling to those assets? How are you getting there? May look different than somebody who's traveling through, who's just coming into a restaurant, et cetera. So just understanding that, I think travel patterns, peak and off-peak, and what that looks like, I think is going to be important. Let's see here. We talk about now and into the future, we talk about our growth. When we talk about transportation, what does transportation look like 20 years ago? What does transportation look like now? And what is it going to look like in 20 years? I don't have a crystal ball. We don't have a crystal ball, but I can probably assure you, based on where we're going with technology, it's going to look far different. And as we grow and people become part of our community, and our community is changing with the different types of growth that we have, we talk about different types of housing. What do people who are living in that specific type of housing, what are they going to need? So I'll give you an example. If you create, I've heard from a couple here tonight that live in a townhome. They bought in a townhome because they don't have kids, and they wanted to be able to be free to travel and not have to maintain a single family home. Looks different than somebody who lives in a single family home. Looks different than somebody who lives in a micro housing unit. So there's different types of housing units. People are coming here and living differently, and understanding the differences on how they're going to commute, I think will be important in this conversation. I think getting back to the software, I think the software, the technology is amazing what we can do and gather. But how are we gathering it? I think Councilmember Dodd brought up making sure we have different methods of gathering that information. But as an example, if I want to talk about how I get my kids to and from a ballpark, I may not engage in that conversation. Or if you want me to engage in that conversation and understand how I'm moving my family around the city of Bothell, maybe it's engaging at that place. Right? So kind of understanding where everybody's at. Cultures live differently throughout our community, so they may not answer in an electronic form. We maybe got to go to a cultural event where they're at and gather information and make it a part of their day-to-day. So as we're having those conversations about public engagement, making sure that we have many different methods of engagement. Different parts of our community live differently. So while we want to say there's an imaginary, no lines, we don't see any lines within our community, different pockets of our community look different. We've heard from people about who live off 9th and 226th and 527 and 522. They all look different, right? And so one size to me doesn't really fit all. So I want to make sure that we're kind of understanding there's a higher impact on a major arterial versus a more moderate arterial versus an individual private road, however that may look, private streets, around schools, those types of impacts. So just making sure that we're having the conversation engaging around that as well. And then the last thing I just really want to make sure that we have more conversation is historical things that we've done in the past. And I think you alluded to this a little bit in the outcomes. And making sure we truly understand the direction that we're trying to go. When we have these conversations about housing and transportation, parks and open space, and all these different things that we're trying to do, how do we bring that together in an outcome performance, saying that if we have 20,000 new people come to our city in the next 10 years, are we going to have all of the transportation? Are we going to have all of the open spaces? Are we going to have all of the housing need? Are we going to be able to meet all that stuff? And I think we can have these conversations in pockets, and I think we do an amazing job of kind of bringing it all together. But if we can have a touch on some of those other elements during this conversation, I think that would be important as well, because being able to get to and from our parks, if you live here, I think is important. Being able to have people come from outside of our community to get to our parks is important, and they're going to need to get there specific ways of transportation. So I just wanted to make sure that I threw that piece in there about the outcome portion of it as well. So thank you.
I have a couple wordsmithing things I'd like to give feedback on, and then a couple questions as well. I'm going to go through the list from top to bottom. So first one for 1A, I'd love to see us add businesses to this priority. We have residents and visitors, but the priority talks about moving goods as well as people. So I'd love to see businesses added in there. On priority 1B, I just noted, I think, what is a Scribner's error? The word frequent is mentioned twice in there. So if we could remove one of those. Frequent. On 1C, the word strive, it's not my favorite word. It's very aspirational and it's not measurable. So I would like to recommend that it's updated to create complete streets, build complete streets. We can measure that. I think that's where we want to be. So I'd love if we could update that one. On 2C, it mentions creating a transportation system that minimizes collisions. I would love to see us mention also near misses, because we know there are many more near misses than there are collisions. And if we're designing correctly for preventing collisions, we're also designing for minimizing near misses as well. On 5A, can you share what some of the TSMO strategies are?
So TSMO, or TISMO as people commonly refer to it, it's a very large umbrella of strategies. It can relate to smarter traffic signals that communicate so that progression along a corridor is as efficient as possible. It could also be programs like travel demand management programs, or TDM programs, that we're proposing for in the Canyon Park sub-area plan. And some of those things included circulator shuttles, anything that could help reduce peak hour vehicle trips.
Perfect. I love that.
There's a very comprehensive list that WashDOT has, but those are kind of, I think, like two key things to think about. It could be programs, but it also could be specific technology that you are implementing.
Similar question for 5C. Can you share some curbside management practices and examples of them?
This is, I think more towards parking management, so on-street parking management. It might make more sense for certain curb space to be specified as loading zones as opposed to unlimited parking throughout the day, or it could be 2-hour limited parking practices to help make the usage of that curb space more efficient for the land use adjacent to it.
Great, thank you. That helps me understand better what we're looking at here. I like those as well. For 6A, just wanted to say thank you for thinking about redundant lifeline routes. I think we don't tend to think of those until we have big issues like earthquakes, fires, other disasters. So planning ahead for those is crucial, and I'd love to see that in there. The last one, 6C. Can you tell me a little bit more about the kind of infrastructure that's vulnerable to climate change hazards? Are we talking about bridges? Are we talking about like heat, buckling of streets? Do we have anything specific in mind for that one?
I don't know if we have anything specific. For climate change, for us, it would probably be a couple different things. We're not right next to the coast. We're not subject to, tidal changes and things like that, but we are subject to flooding. So our flooding, our 100-year flood is not coming every 100 years. It's coming very often. It's very heavy. So things are getting pounded more. So we have to account for that and durability, as well as there are areas that still flood, like 240th Street near 35th, that just floods. And right now, we just don't have sufficient funds, but it's something we need to address. The other climate change that you referred to is like buckling. So as the temperatures go up, our roadways right now perform a certain way because we're in the Pacific Northwest. If we were in Arizona, they might have a different content of asphalt and be put together a little differently. So we have to adjust to that kind of climate change. So it's not necessarily a catastrophic thing, but it could be something that we do in order to reduce our maintenance costs over the long run. There are some agencies that are looking at kind of reflective material, which I kind of question, but it heats up less, it retains less heat than a blacktop. And so things like that are things we would consider in terms of transportation rules, I'd say.
Great, thank you. These priorities are great. Thank you for all the work on them, and I think they're pretty comprehensive.
Thank you. A lot of the things that I had on my list were already talked about. Just to emphasize a few, the 0 deaths versus 0 misses. I think I know it's harder to measure. We might get a proxy with the map, but it's still something that I feel like it's important. It was called out earlier, 0 deaths. I don't know if we should call out 0 near misses. I know it's a much harder thing to measure, but something to call out so that we'll know we're intentional about that. Public engagement, it was mentioned, Councilmember McNeil and others have talked about and Councilmember Dodd getting to where people are at to get that information, because I really loved how we did it with Missing Middle. We went to communities that we don't hear from often or at all, and we went after them in an intentional manner. So let's figure out a plan to go after those folks who would otherwise not come to us or even visit that cool map. Speaking of cool map, I'm a product guy, a software product. So the design of this, is it a final design or is it not a final design yet? That map where people go and tag. I know it's silly, but
that map, that survey has not been officially created on the city's
but you're going to use something similar to this software?
It may not be the same as that.
I know.
That was just an example from a colleague working in Tukwila, and they're going through that process right now. So I'd have to talk to Sarah to figure out.
I have some feedback on the color scheme and all, because if you want to, if it says, I have issue with riding transit here, an issue is, a cool color over here, but it's supposed to be, this is a problem. So it's supposed to be more of a red, orange, whatever, so that people will know to differentiate between something that's good and something that's bad. But I'll leave it up to your designers, but I just thought I'll sidebar mention this. The higher level question I have, you have a list of those priorities and the sub things in there, but then in the process, all the way to the bottom is when you have the performance measures. So how are you going to decide? Can you clarify, do you want us to give you feedback on the prioritization that you already have now, 1 through 6? Or do you want us to give you additional ones, remove some? And then how are we going to prioritize those?
They are not in any order, and they
Okay.
are not weighted.
Okay,
I think in the fall, in fact, we'll probably be coming back at the next council meeting, next planning commission meeting, and talking about that, how we would go through that prioritization
so you're
process.
asking, is this set of priorities?
We're
okay.
not asking you what's more important than the other at this point, yes.
Because they're so high level. I mean, it's like, yes, they look great. I mean, it's not.
Right.
So I don't have personally anything additional, and the sub bullets seem to be good. I think we need to, once we get to the what goes first, what goes second, that's when we need, because you have a prioritization time here, but there's another one where you have the little they're listed, the process was listed, and then you have performance measures at the bottom, one of the slides. Next. Yeah, this one. So you have a prioritization up there, and then you come to metrics. You do constrained project list. I feel like a performance measures, that has to be way into what you prioritize, right?
Yes. So it's a good question, because I thought the same thing when I first saw this too. So we were prioritize projects and programs. In my mind, the way I look at this, some of the programs we're going to develop are probably like TDM. We might expand it outside of Canyon Park, maybe downtown, areas that it seems low-hanging fruit it would work. Those are the ones we would create performance measures, because we do have to measure how well they perform. It's great to have a program, but if it's not working, we're going to have some results that we have to adjust to. So those are the performance measures, and I think you're correct. While we're talking about these programs, we have to set what kind of level we're looking at, which is what we did at Canyon Park. And based on that level, we can be, I think you used the term conservative, very aggressive, and somewhere in between. And you have a level that you achieve. And because you've achieved that level, then that's less impact on your transportation system. You have to put that in and follow up and check and make sure.
So this is not a linear list, like you're gonna be, depending on what you're prioritizing, you're gonna.
By the time we get to writing in the performance measures, I think we will already have gone through our prioritization and listing of projects and programs that require those performance measures, because we're gonna use.
So you're gonna set the performance measures first, and then you're gonna say what
Yeah,
the
so let's say
priorities
you
are.
want a 7% reduction in trips, vehicle trips, because you use alternative means in Canyon Park. The 7% means you have less traffic, and therefore you don't have to build an extra lane. So that 7% means something. If you don't get the 7%, then what means is your system's not going to perform as well, and we have to adjust to that, or adjust our program.
I get what you're saying. Which you clarified now, the point, my question was, are we gonna do each one of those things independently of the other things? But it seems like it's an art more than a science. Like, what do you, because you do need your goals before you prioritize, right?
Yes, I think if we were to look at this and say it's all going to happen in discrete months, I think you're right. It is somewhat iterative, because we're going to come out with a list of projects, and we're going to have to look at the cost of those projects and see where we can afford in 20 years. If we can't afford it in 20 years, we have to adjust something. It may or may not be the transportation system. It may be our goals and how many people we can bring into Bothell and all that kind of stuff. So it could very well be iterative. Hopefully, we're kind of checking these things as we go, and we have a target. We don't look at our constrained project list and say, we can spend twice the money that we really think we're going to have in 20 years, so we kind of get close to our target. So we will have to be a little cognizant as we work through it.
Cool. And we're gonna be talking about, as time progresses and as more is happening, we're gonna be talking about these things.
We will keep coming back and telling you where we are and what we've seen and what, we're going to be talking to you about developing that prioritization across capacity projects, which include sidewalk projects and bike projects. We also have safety projects, which don't help us with capacity. We also have resiliency projects, which don't help us with capacity. So somehow we're going to have to figure out how to prioritize across all those different
Right.
bands of project types. Make sure we can afford it in 20 years, and then what does that allow us growth-wise with the land use stuff?
And how are, speaking of land use, how is the land use component going to be? Because I think it was mentioned a couple of times, because it's a system. It's not just roads or bike lanes or whatever. It's like you have houses, you have services, you have parks. Like those things have to work with each other. How is the other stuff going to get taken into consideration as you build your priority list?
You may have to help me out here, but I'll take a shot. So a lot of the questions that are coming up are great questions, and a lot of the things you want to know are very interesting, and it would be great to know. How do we travel off peak hours to recreation and things like that, or errands and things like that? Where are people coming from when they work in Bothell, and where are they going? Those are great things, and they can help us advocate for certain improvements that can help those. If we find a large percentage come from a certain area, we would advocate for a better BRT system down I-405, because a lot of people are coming from Bellevue to work in Bothell, or something like that. It's not an easy thing to do. In the old days, it would be a license plate survey or extra data. Now there are some other tools that may be available, and we'll talk to Carmen about that. The way this typically runs from a planning point of view, though, is we typically look for the transportation system capacity in the worst case, which tends to be PM peak hour, when people are coming home. It's not even doing AM, because people tend to start a little bit different. We typically don't look midday, because when we have to look at the capacity of our system, it's the peak. It's not really the off hour that we're looking for. And that's just, it's a manner to get through it efficiently. Because if we had to look at every hour in the day and assume what the traffic is and then try to adjust our system accordingly, we would probably wind up pretty similar to the peak hour system, because that's where the needs are. I think that's where some of our creativeness can come in, because it's very hard on people like me to design something that's going to be used 6 hours a day, and then the 3 lanes, and then the rest of the day you need 1 lane or 2 lanes. So it would be great if we can come up with a way that we don't require that. And part of that is the multimodal use, So there are things that we can do to do that, but I think at the end of the day, the process we typically go for is look at the worst case and design for that. And are there ways we can shrink that? And then we make some assumptions that it will work off hours during the evenings and that sort of thing. Special events are out the door. We have to kind of look each one at a time. So that's kind of how we put it together. So we will look into the questions you have, because they're very interesting. I think those would provide us information. It might not help us develop our total system, but it might help us figure out how to advocate for certain things that might help our community better.
Deputy Mayor, I think within your question too is the aspect of, as we think about the process, it's kind of like with this flow chart too, of like, we put in order of that. And there are multiple elements of the comp plan. Mm-hmm. And the different elements of the comp plan are also going to have an impact of mm-hmm. how are different things, like in this case, transportation systems used. So to that end, I think that is part of where like that's why we'll continue to move into the center of the room and have these study session conversations around, as we look at the different elements, there's a bit of an iterative process, and different feedback that we hear on different elements too will help start informing. There might be some things that again, in the transportation element, there might be some information that comes from another area that informs how things work. So some of this is, we have in terms of the topics that come to council, we have a little bit of a blessing of time if there are multiple touches on this. But I think it is a good thing to hold on to of in future conversations about different elements, be thinking about too of like how might this impact the transportation element and vice versa. So I think in some ways what I heard you speaking about too is how does this all build on itself?
That's exactly, it's a machine. Comp plan is a machine with a bunch of gears, you know? One moves, everything else moves. So what's the effect of one on the other and all that? That's the question. Thank you.
Can I jump in on one more thing? A couple things that were brought up that Councilmember Mankey brought up businesses, and Councilmember Aldrich's brought up people that are coming to Bothell and maybe not be able to afford to live in Bothell or something. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit. It'd be important to understand also, do those people choose to live where they're living? And what are the jobs, current jobs that are available? What do those look like? What do we anticipate future jobs to look like? So that we are looking at those opportunities to be able to welcome more into our community. So as an example, if we have our Canyon Park Growth Center and the businesses that are out there, what type of job opportunities are they providing versus what type of job opportunities is North Creek providing versus overall citywide, the grocery stores and things like that, the markets, what do those jobs look like? So not a small picture, but a bigger picture and understanding of, who are those, because I think you mentioned some people are coming from Bellevue. Well, Bellevue's, costs in Bellevue to buy a home in Bellevue are just as high or maybe higher than Bothell. So why are they coming, if they're not living in Bothell, why aren't they living in Bothell, right? Just kind of understanding that dynamic.
So expectations. So our comp plan, we're going to try to stuff as much as we can and plan for everything. And like I said, there are going to be limitations. Some of the questions we have here made me think about our TDM program that we've got funding for Canyon Park. And those are some of the questions that in surveys, we're going to do an opposite. What's your barrier analysis, in other words? Why are you, how do you get into work? How are you getting home? When do you come? Where do you work? Do you have to be here every day? Does your employer allow you to telecommute? Some of these questions are very much lined up with TDM, and so that's not really part of the comp plan. But I'm pretty much sure that coming out of this comp plan, we'll probably expand that program. So it might be an implementation of the comp plan. You might not see it in the comp plan, but there will be policies there that says we're going to do a TDM program. Because we're doing a TDM program, we can start doing all these surveys and getting all that kind of information and things. So again, this is where staff gets very excited and we want to do all these things too. And then we say, oh, we got 9 months, we have to finish it. And so what we would do is we would do as much as we can, set the policy, try to get the policies so that we know that a year from now, 2 years from now, and we're coming to you to try to find grants and budgets to do these things, we can accomplish this. And actually, he's going to come up with an implementation plan. That will be part of our implementation plan, how we're going to unfold all this stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciated that. I think the other thing too is I think back to the ARCH project list we looked at, and these other municipalities, and I'm just going to pick on like Kirkland, Bellevue, they have more affordable housing options too. Like the Bothell projects were smaller and really focused on that. So, or it could be they're living with family, or so it's interesting to know not only like why are you working in Bothell but living elsewhere, because I think the reasons could be really varied. But what I was going to ask about, so I have, just because I guess I don't have enough hobbies, was watching some planning commission meetings, and they mentioned, and this came up when I was on the commission many times, but sometimes when they go to make a recommendation, they say, well, the best thing like for the environment and for people is X, but we are worried about parking management, because as we get to where we maybe require less parking to see what else could pencil out for people, if that's not part of it, if we don't manage our parking, if we don't enforce the time limits that are in place, then that makes it a lot harder to to say, let's go do this, because people feel sort of abandoned as far as parking on the street, or, you know, if you want a guest, but people who picked an apartment without parking are parking there instead, right? We know. So I really hope to see in the comp plan, the plan to manage our parking actively and make sure that as we look at what's best for the environment, what's best for the affordability of housing and stuff, that we are not sort of abandoning people to sort of the wild jungle of maybe you'll find a spot, maybe you won't. You don't have to put that part in the comp plan, though, but thank you.
I believe parking management is actually like on the work plan, apart from the comp plan that we set up through the goal-setting process as well. Numbers 3 and 5 of the priorities, I know we've had a wandering discussion that gets away from the priority list, but like circling back to that, the 3 and 5 seemed very similar. Like they could be part, like, we've got encourage growth in an equitable manner and invest in growth that is smart, strategic, and sustainable. It seems like we could wordsmith that into one.
Can I take the mic, Mayor?
Please.
Thanks. While Steve was talking, this may be a very naive question, but I seem to recall through the council visioning process, did we articulate a goal or vision where we could prioritize people living near their work? Thank you, City Manager, for looking that up. Because if that is already in our vision, I'd like to see that reflected. And I could just be making stuff up, but yeah.
I think we could look through the narrative of each section. I do think that there's probably some aspect or element that goes into the neighborhood connectivity of around how is the housing types incorporating opportunities. There's different elements there. So we can follow up on that to really see what elements. But I think sharing that theme, whether it's in the vision or not, is a good thing to.
Yeah. Like, because it may relate beyond TDM. If we have actually articulated saying that we hope to help people live near where they work, then that should be part of our comprehensive planning for transportation as well. Because that relates to how people get around. So, thank you.
So if there's no further discussion on that, we'll keep going and we'll get Carmen to talk about MMLOS.
Thank you. And so there's actually kind of 3 topics related to multimodal level of service that we'll be talking about tonight. The first one, level of service policies themselves. It's a promise of how the transportation system will perform. Related to that is transportation concurrency. So making sure that transportation system is operating within the goals that we have set as the community develops over time. And the last one is impact fees. So that is a method for paying for infrastructure to support that growth in the city. So the first one, transportation level of service. Let me go to the next slide. Just to highlight for everyone here, the current policy in the comprehensive plan is focused on auto travel in the city, and it focuses on delays along corridors in the city. One thing that staff is interested in moving towards in this comprehensive plan update is the multimodal level of service policies. And so it's identifying policies and measures for people walking, biking, and riding transit. And once you have policies related to that, you will be looking at projects to improve the transportation system for them. So it will not be focused solely on auto improvements in the city. Next slide. I realize this slide is, the text here is probably a little too small for you all to read, but I just wanted to emphasize that the current comprehensive plan recommends measuring level of service for other modes, but there are no clear guidelines set as of right now. And so that is something that we're in the process of doing. Next slide. In terms of potential level of service policies by mode, there are a lot of options to consider for driving, people walking, biking, riding transit, or potentially for the entire transportation system as a whole. We've been talking with staff about various options and also looking at whether other communities have implemented and how they're monitoring and managing that. So at upcoming meetings, we can provide feedback on what staff are leaning towards for each mode. Transportation concurrency. So this is making sure that the level of service standards that are set are being kept as development occurs. Next slide. So the Growth Management Act requires that facilities are provided to maintain the level of service goals as development occurs. And one thing that the city is leaning towards is looking at a system completeness model as opposed to the city's current standards, which is again focused on measuring auto delay along corridors. Next slide. So the system completeness model, it tracks construction of improvement projects within the transportation system, and it compares it against how much new development is occurring over time. And the idea is that we are checking to make sure that the transportation system we want to have is on track to being constructed as we allow permits are given out for new housing, new commercial spaces are being built. It's also focused more on person trips as opposed to auto trips, which is what our system currently monitors. Next slide. The last item is transportation impact fees. And again, it's a one-time payment that is charged to new development, and that is to support capacity increasing projects within the city. Go to the next slide, actually. And one thing to think about is if the city is moving towards a multimodal level of service policy, that also allows the city to charge developers funds to help fund projects to make it easier for people to walk, bike, or ride transit in the city.
No barking here, and there are 3 drinks that you might take.
Okay. Next slide.
Safety.
I'll take one.
So for safety, I just wanted to give a brief highlight on the scope of work that we're doing for the transportation element. Next slide. So we are updating the city's safety plan, which was last developed in 2020. And the safety plan will support Bothell's priority of working towards 0 fatalities and severe injuries. One of the key things about this update is we will be looking at a citywide crash history from 2016 to 2022. And so we will be looking at travel patterns and potential serious and fatal injuries that have occurred before 2019, so before COVID, and also during COVID. So how has that changed in the last 3 years, and what type of crash patterns may we see? As part of this safety work, we're also taking a systemic planning approach to it. So we are looking at where serious and fatal collisions are occurring and identifying a high-risk profile. So what were the characteristics of the collisions that occurred? Was there poor lighting, high speeds, any other roadside objects that could have affected that. And we'll be looking within the city to identify areas that have similar factors and identifying potential countermeasures at those locations as well to prevent future collisions there. Next slide.
Can we go through that?
Oh,
Planning Commission.
so we had presented this information to the Planning Commission earlier in June, and some of the feedback they had provided was to consider if roadway maintenance is incorporated into the safety plan. They wanted to highlight that enforcement and education are important. And the last comment is that during the development of the city's bike plan, there was a extensive public engagement process. And so are we including the feedback collected in that process and considering that in our safety plan?
Okay, so I'll go through transportation system resiliency, and then we will entertain questions and comments about that. So you're going to hear the term resiliency quite often over the next year and a half, and it's one of those broad terms again that can mean several things. In this particular case, though, we're going to focus on just the transportation system resiliency. So transportation is the ability of the transportation system to prepare for, withstand, and recover from disruptions, whether they're natural or man-made. The list of potential disruptions has always included things like earthquakes and flooding. However, like we talked before, heavy rain events are becoming heavier and more frequent. Heat may become more of an issue if we have fires locally, but may also affect things like pavement material. We include snow and wind events, even though they're not necessarily considered catastrophic, hopefully, most times. Also, we can even consider minor things compared to like catastrophes, like a seismic event, like an accident. Will there be enough redundancy in the system so that emergency vehicles can even get there? Things like that. So one thing to recognize is there are major and minor events to consider and prepare for. And as we go through this comp plan, we're going to start with the major and again, prioritize. So there are vulnerable points in our system that we can already identify. We won't be able to upgrade the entire system all at once. So likely we will focus on the lifelines. Those are kind of the emergency route. Lifelines, the terminology that the region uses for emergency routes. And we're going to try to make them as resilient as possible. And much like this safety program that will come up with a list of safety projects, we will come up with a prioritized resiliency project list. So this kind of shows the process that we're taking. Rayed has completed a literature review, and he has held his first meeting with internal stakeholders. And he'll continue to coordinate with his internal group. He'll touch base with our transportation focus group, which includes transit agencies, WashDOT, North Shore School District. And we will continue to keep you up to date. And we'll also reach out to the public as part of, under the entire umbrella that we're all following under in the comp plan. A couple of things we heard from the Planning Commission were make sure emergency access is maintained for key community locations, including things like senior housing. And the question of, can we consider continued transit service as resilience, a form of resiliency? So those are the three topics we just covered: MMLOS, safety, and transportation system resiliency. And again, I think we'd pause there if you have questions or comments.
Well, when you were talking about safety, I started to think something that's not on my radar very often, but I think is a reality is people get more compressed, budgets get more stressed. We have other parts of the planet that it's very dominant in, increased use of motorbikes. And how do we make it safer for them to travel on the roads and keep our cyclists and pedestrians safe at the same time? I anticipate we're going to see more motorcycles on the road. I mean, my family has discussions of how can I get to work cheaper motorcycle, which a mother loves to hear. Doesn't. And then, you know, I think we had a major motorcycle accident this weekend here in Bothell. So somewhere in the conversation, considering motorcycle usage and encouraging them to be safe. A lot of that is on the drivers bear responsibility, both in cars and on the bikes. But how do we set motorcycles up for success as well and be safe?
I think this is a quick question, but I noticed when we were talking about the safety review, one of the points of feedback from the Planning Commission is the feedback from the bike plan incorporated? Is it?
So within the bike plan, there is an appendix with recorded comments from the public, so we can definitely go through that and see how that may overlap with public comments that we may see on our online survey.
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense to incorporate that, because just because it was for the bike plan doesn't mean it's not about still how, it's not stale at this point. So cool. I just wanted to make sure, because I was like waiting for the answer. Thank you.
I want to jump in and say that, I fully believe that our bike plan does contribute to the multimodal idea in the city. And so I'd very much like to see that feedback incorporated, or at least, I don't know if you need to be redundant and get more information, but there may be some additional questions that you might want to include in the public engagement piece around bikes. I'm sure you're already going to do that, though. I also just want to say I really appreciate both staff, consultant, planning commission, and their work on the safe systems and also the disaster resiliency. It's really thoughtful work. I would like, if possible, to go back to the map on page 89. This map, as you described, is from 2015. It's the concurrency corridors map. Cool. I realize you don't have page numbers in your slides. Yeah, thank you for finding it. Almost there. That one. Okay, so this map has basically served its life purpose since we're now doing a new comprehensive plan, and I can see the direction that previous councils were going in when this was developed. I'd like to ask if it is possible to complete some of these loops in our upcoming comprehensive plan, specifically connecting the green corridor from Filbert Road, 524, down to 228. That would be a nice completion of that loop. And if I understand the loop down in downtown properly, that little gap between 522 and I'm guessing Beardsley is probably our downtown and would include our pedestrianized Main Street as well. So I'm not going to say anything about that because there's a reason for why there's a disruption. Although, could it be rerouted through 185th since there are transit corridors being developed on 185th? So those are my two questions about, as we look forward to the future, completing those loops makes a lot of sense. And then also down at the very bottom, what is that, 145th up to 100th that goes up to 522 is another loop that could be completed through there. I like loops as a walker and a biker. I don't like to have to stop, turn around, and then go back the way I came. I like to just keep going and flowing through places. It makes me happy.
So those are the level of service corridors where we measure how well we're performing. And typically they're chosen because they're critical in making sure that the system works as a whole. If the volumes are not there, like Fitzgerald, we'll look at it, but Fitzgerald may not have the volumes. It's not as critical when you look at the bigger picture. For those residents, it's critical, and local streets are all critical. But in terms of the city's functioning from a vehicle capacity, that might not be. Now, you brought up a good point. We've talked about 185th, which is going to be our transit corridor. Shouldn't we be measuring performance on our transit corridor? Because we want to make sure transit gets through okay. So we are definitely looking at that one. 100th, I think, I don't know, but that could be one. We're talking about potentially Meridian and 240th up in the west side, because those carry quite a bit of traffic right now. So again, they need to rise to a certain level. We don't want to put all our corridors on there. Typically, they're the ones that rise and the most critical ones. So I've logged what you said, and we'll take a look at that.
Yeah, and you make a good point about, volume. We may have found that in the last, 10 years that the volume in those areas have increased and would rise to the level of needing to study and measure them. Thank you.
I'll jump in next since we're looking at this map. When I saw this map, I've seen it before. Living in the northeastern part of the city, it's tough living up in the E and F corridor. There's many reasons for that. We've discussed a lot of them tonight. People getting off the freeway, going north. They don't want to be on 405. And I didn't think of this till tonight, but Bothell Highway and 405 have the same number of lanes. So that's troubling that the state highway has the same number of lanes as the interstate. I'm glad you mentioned completing the interstate going up to Linwood, expanding it, making it 4 lanes. I think we should lean on the state for that and the state DOT to do that. I think it's a better solution than adding more lanes to Bothell Highway. As much as I hate driving in that traffic, adding more lanes, and I'm saying this, yes, adding more lanes there is probably not the right thing to do, given that it's already 3 lanes in each direction with the turn lane in the middle. But that being said, I know we're also constrained up there. We don't have as many north, south, east, west roads as some areas in the center of the city and in the southern part of the city, although I think the southern part of the city also has some connection issues there. But I would love to see 214th punch through. If the data says that that would help traffic, I would love to see us focus on that. Also 9th, I know that's in the blanking on the name of the CFP. It's in there, so that's good. But I also had got a different perspective this weekend. So I looked at the packet on Saturday, and then I went on a bike ride on Sunday with my 8-year-old son. We dropped down from the northeast corner down into the business park, hopped on the trail, rode the trail to McDonald's, and then we got on Bothell Highway and rode on the sidewalk all the way down to Thrashers. And as someone who doesn't typically bike ride down there or bike ride really much at all these days, but it elevated certain hazards to me that I was not aware of before as a driver. Crossing all of those intersections and all of the business frontage there is incredibly dangerous as a rider, and having an 8-year-old behind me made me very aware that cars are moving in and out, they're moving quickly. There's a lot of improvement that could be done there. If you can get on the trail, you're golden because you know you're protected there, but if you're out on that highway, you're not going to be riding the lane along cars going 45 miles an hour. You're going to be up on the sidewalk like I was doing, which I'm pretty sure is illegal. So Chief's gone, so that's fine.
It's on the public record.
It's on public record, but it does need there are some needed improvements. So the MMLOS, while I was at first not excited to see that, I think there is a lot that we can do with that, and we should be looking at other methods of transit in this area. TDM is great. I'm glad we're doing that. I still want to see investment in other roads like 9th and other areas where it makes sense, but other protected options for people who are either walking or biking or skating or whatever people may be using, I think is a good way to approach this and what we should be doing going forward. So I agree with the mayor. People should be able to move how they desire to move and in the method and mode they desire to move. And cars probably are not going to go away for a long time. I wish we were in a time when our infrastructure could handle shared use vehicles and you can just summon your own private taxi whenever you want to, and we all share vehicles and we can all turn our garages into rooms and, you know, more housing, things like that. But we're not there yet. So as long as we're doing a balance and we're looking at everything and we're improving everything as it makes sense and we're following the data on what makes sense and how people are moving and we're encouraging people to move perhaps differently when they can. Not everybody can hop on a bike. If you're a parent with 3 kids, probably is not going to make sense most of the time. If you're commuting to work, you may need to be on work calls if you can do that. So a bike's not ideal for that, but maybe other days of the week it is. Maybe walking works sometimes. So we need to look at it holistically. I'm glad we're looking at this, although we're going to keep seeing that area probably be in E and F territory forever at this point, unless we stack a double deck on top of 527 and have an express lane going to Mill Creek. Those folks are still going to need to commute through town, and that's never going to go away. So I like this approach, this new approach. I am supportive of it, and I'm interested to see as your work continues on this, where we go.
I'll give you a little out. So the I-405 between 527 and Linwood, I believe it's express toll lane, which the BRT would also use. So it's not just a widening for a general purpose. I believe it's trying to get really BRT up to Linwood.
I'm glad they did put in the hard shoulder running in there as well. I've noticed an improvement with that. Going up even during the weekdays, I've gone up in the middle of the day to Everett, and when those are open, traffic is flowing better, and even in the middle of the day, we're still seeing traffic up in that area. So I don't know if having an extra lane there would help people not pass through Canyon Park going to Mill Creek. I have a feeling they would still see that as a faster way than going up to Linwood and then up to Mill Creek and trying to get off in Mill Creek and then head down through Martha Lake down into Mill Creek. So I don't know if there is a solve there, but yeah, if we could get another lane on 405 and a short lane on I-5 to get off onto 164, that could help. But I know we're not going to get any money from unincorporated Snohomish County probably for this, even though that's where a lot of people are going, and we're not going to get any money from Mill Creek for this. It's kind of on us, unfortunately, based on where we are at. I guess we should consider ourselves fortunate to have 405 running through our city and 522 and 527. Makes us a great place to be. It's easy to get to Bellevue. It's easy to get to Seattle. It's easy to get to wherever you want to go. But it also comes with the cars of our residents and people passing through going to those other places. So it's tough. I don't know how we solve it. I don't know if we can, but I'm glad we're making an effort and we're looking at different ways to do that, things that make sense. I think that's where we need to be, and I'm glad to see this show up.
I had one thing on safety, just not really a direction question, but more of a how we actually do this. We had a public comment tonight talking about how fast people drive on 9th Avenue. And as I forget the term, transportation, I don't remember the term, but there was a line in here about like, it shifts the responsibility of safety from the user to the designer. And that made my heart sing. My question is, as we maintain roads, like with the Safe Streets and Sidewalks Levy, things like that, once we have the comp plan done and we have new standards, is there a way that we can adjust the roads, whether it be lane width or adding some manner of traffic calming or something like that as we maintain them?
Depending on the solution, I think. And I think that's part of the discussion we're going to have is how do we address some of these issues like speeding and things. It's difficult because there's many solutions. I mean, we put in radar beacon, we put in flashing beacons, we tell you how your speed is, that helps a little bit. Speed bumps is one thing that agencies have used. There are pluses and minuses with speed bumps. If you're a bike person, you're right in the dark, you don't know it's there. It's pretty dramatic. Motorcycles, if they're more motorcycles, same thing. We can try to narrow roads, which I think when we're doing new roads is what we're looking at now, trying to design to appropriate speed. In the old days, they designed to get people moving and get people through. So it's a little different mentality. Just paving a road, it's very hard to calm traffic. You tend to need to do more than just put a speed bump there or something like that. So I think it does take a concerted effort, but I think there's multiple tools that we can use. And again, I think this is where the programs come in, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Some of these streets are different, and there are different behaviors going on in different things. So there are different solutions. The paving money is probably not the way that we're going to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking about, and it's kind of a similar thought, different context, is talking about 405. We are, we in Canyon Park, I was looking at my Snohomi, we are the last exit, before you just get up to the interchange, right? Like, you can't get off of 405 again until it's not 405 anymore, or you're getting onto I-5 or whatever. And that's been the case since 7 years ago when I learned how to drive. So I think if there isn't, I don't know who decides we need another exit, but I do wonder if that's a conversation, if that's a conversation we could have at some point, as far as like the burden that puts on Bothell Everett Highway. And, I think it's worth talking about, but I realize that's far out of the scope of our comprehensive plan, but I would love to see us figure out just an advocacy plan. And that's where, even if we don't want their money, we could loop in the county and the city of Mill Creek and Linwood. And, I think that it's kind of odd to me. 405 has been mostly the same, except for the toll lanes and the different exit when you're going north on exit 26 for roughly my whole life. So it's interesting. And I know changes are coming soon, but not necessarily alleviating this problem either. And then again, similar but different, when we talk about 9th, if you look at the map and ways you can get through the city, there aren't a lot of through roads, right? We don't have a good grid. We have a lot of windy, twisty cul-de-sacs and roads that dead end. And so people speed down 9th, probably because they're, I would imagine there's just not a lot of ways. They've been in traffic. Okay, wow, finally a free road, right? But that's the only one that's going to get you to the other road you want to get to. So is part of the plan at some point to add more through roads so that we don't just have the one road that's overburdened with people who finally found a way through? I do wonder if some of that behavior is just because we don't have as good of a network with more options to get through the city.
I think once we go through the initial modeling versus the land use and see where we are, that would typically tell us if we need to do new roads. Like when we did the Canyon Park sub-area plan, 2 new roads popped up, 20th and 214th. They were needed for capacity to meet our requirement at the time. It kind of goes counter to our goal of not putting down as many roads as we can. So I would say we would probably lean toward not building new roads if we possibly can, because they're very expensive. We got to maintain them forever. And frankly, if there's not a road now, there's probably a reason there isn't a road right now. It's challenging. And that's what we found out. As an example, at one point, when I first started here, one of my first projects was to connect 39th up from 240 to 228. And back in the late 1970s, it was like a $2 million project. And by the time I got to it, it was an $80 million project because of steep slopes, wetlands, crossing streams, all kinds of things. So I think that would be our last alternative, to build new roads. But I understand the need to calm roads down. And that's not necessarily a capacity issue. It's more of a speeding issue and an environment issue. So those are things we need to balance, I think, somehow. And I also would like to answer you in the sense of, I think we're trying to plan strategically as well, as like when we did Canyon Park, we added 20th as a new road and 214th because we absolutely had to. Even with TDM, we couldn't make it work. And we had a requirement. But it's a 20-year plan. So when do you build those roads? So to me, 214th was probably the last road to build because 20th would do more good. 20th would complete a grid, take some load off 527, a brand new bike connection up there. 214th goes through wetlands and all kinds of things. And although it serves the 9th Avenue neighborhood, if they work in Canyon Park, and as they go down 527, it's going to create more traffic. So things like that, we think about, it's a 20-year plan, and we do what we need to do and as minimal as possible to get that 20 years to work. But it doesn't mean you're going to get all the way to that point because we don't know what's going to happen in the 15th year onto the 20th year. So kind of a long-winded, if there were low-hanging fruit with no environmental impact with a brand-new road that would help us tremendously, I think so, but I'm not sure we're going to see that.
No, and I appreciate the long explanation, and I don't know that I would have predicted me being like, let's build more roads, because that's not in character. But I just think, I don't know, it's odd to me sometimes how few connections there are, but then it kind of slows down a lot more roads, but then the people who live on the road that does connect, they're like, oh, thanks, and yeah, whatever we can do for 9th, I think is really key. There's one of our only playgrounds in Snohomish County. I think we have 2, and then the school. And I mean, just as a driver or a cyclist, I'm always there's always something horrifying happening with someone speeding through or ignoring safety, just basic stuff. So, yeah.
I'll just add to that. I grew up in Mr. Bowman's neighborhood. And when I was going to school at Crystal Springs, I was not allowed to ride down 9th, even in the early 90s, because it was already fast-moving vehicles at that time. So I'd love to see that project done. I know it's on our list, and I think it'll do a lot for safety, pedestrian safety, bicycle safety, and even vehicle safety.
You answered the question that I had about this map. So it's more of a macro view of if the corridors are red, that means something bad is happening elsewhere too. So we need to figure out how to address that those issues. Correct? Is my understanding correct on how you're measuring level of service?
Do you want to take that? You're probably better at this than I. She's the modeler. So
specifically how we measure the level of service on these corridors, we are looking at each of the little dots. It's a main arterial intersection along the corridor. And we take peak hour traffic volumes and we model the intersection itself, like the number of lanes, number of pedestrian crossings in the vehicles, and we can estimate the average intersection delay. So we have that information for one intersection, and then we will average it for the entire corridor as a whole. And so our standard is LOSE for each corridor, and so that's actually an estimate of the average seconds of delay that we're looking at.
My question was, so you see something, so is A bad or is it good?
A is good.
Okay, Z. So if I go to Z, you see a level of, X or whatever.
It goes A through F. So it's like
F.
the grades you get at school. A is good.
Okay, something
F is not
becomes
great.
bad. I call it red and green, right? So business guy. So there's the intersections or the average becomes red. But how do you know where the problem originated from? Because if the corridor has an average of E, and then it changes, something else must have messed it up, right? It's like, how do you know where to go? Like in one of those things that you don't measure, one of the roads that you don't, how do you know where to go? Because you mentioned you don't want to look at each street and all that because that's too much work, right?
So you really don't. Now, if there's a problem on a intersection that's off of our measured intersections, we would have to do a special study for that particular intersection. And if there's a large development coming in, 900 units or something, we might make them do that. And we might make them mitigate that if that particular intersection is going to go to level of service F because those 900 units come in. But it's not part of our concurrency thing. In other words, we're not going to measure every single intersection and say you can't have another apartment built because this intersection in this part of the city doesn't work. That's what the corridors are for. So it's kind of a balance. And I think what you kind of alluded to is it kind of measures the health of the whole system.
Yeah.
Those are the major corridors that we need to work. It doesn't mean every single intersection is going to work if those corridors work. We would have to look at every single intersection. and
My
measure.
question actually was the converse. If those corridors become bad, how do you know where the problem is?
I think that's a modeling exercise. We figure out where all the development has occurred that we didn't predict correctly and where that traffic is coming from. And then we see why that's happening. And it could be not even in their city. It could be something right out of our city, something happened.
How often do you do the modeling?
We don't do the modeling.
Of the view, how do you have a dashboard that shows those intersections and?
No, I think we need to do more. I think as we should be checking this periodically, and periodically means maybe once a year or something as development goes, just to do a check. We probably need to do a better job of that, yeah.
Okay, no, thank you, I appreciate it. Silly questions, I know, but I just don't
No,
understand.
those
how
are great questions,
How
yeah.
the machine works. Something about the safety thing too. Again, I just want to suggest that we call out near misses because deaths and serious crashes were explicitly mentioned. But I know it's a harder problem to solve or harder to measure, but something if we call it out, at least we are intentional about figuring out how to solve that problem. Because we heard testimony today, and I mean. We could have lost Councilmember Mankey a long time ago while he was riding his bike to Crystal Springs. It would have been an issue, you know. So those things you won't know about if you don't intentionally go after. So just I suggest it. And under the safety section, resiliency. You mentioned you listed you had under resiliency at the end you had a process flow map, you know. And with the list of priorities, does that list of priorities different than the overall priorities, or is it going to be part of it?
So one of the things we're doing with each terrible word, call it a silo though, let's say vehicles, pedestrian projects, bike projects, safety projects, resiliency projects. We are likely to prioritize them within their groups, but then prioritize them across. If that makes sense.
That makes sense, but you get 5 priorities here. I mean, you have you have a long list, but those ones are always more important than how do you mix and match?
Yeah, so that's part of our prioritization process we're going to talk to you about. And it might be what project collectively addresses a lot. So 9th Avenue, I heard a lot. So 9th Avenue is a capacity project. It's also would be a safety project. It would be a pedestrian project. It would be a bike project. It probably rates pretty high, so that would score it well. Another project might take care of maybe just vehicle capacity or just fill in a pedestrian gap. It may not score as high, even though those are high on their individual list. They may not score high across the board. So it's going to be an interesting exercise, but that's what we have to go through to prioritize, you know, the resources we have.
Okay, I appreciate that. So it is. So even though it's called out here explicitly only for resiliency, it is still part of the overall.
I believe Red's going to go with his internal group, the safety people, emergency operation people, internally and prioritize theirs.
Their little
just
column.
like the bike has been prioritized by everybody. And then we're going through a process to prioritize our pedestrian sidewalk gaps, so there will be a prioritized list. And then from there, we will cross and try to figure out.
This is where the art comes in, then it's not going to be a science, right?
It's not going to be a science.
Yeah.
It's going to be a prioritization, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I would like to talk about safety a little bit. So to me, safety, I understand near misses. I understand the next one might not be a near miss. So part of the systemic look that Carmen's going to do is that. So if we see either from our survey that the same place comes up, that raises a red flag, or, we have Jamal, our traffic engineer, collecting inquiries and comments and concerns every day, and he's keeping a log. So if that comes in, we can certainly put those on the list. But I also want to make sure that we are going to have to prioritize our safety projects as well. So if we have a fatality or a severe injury versus a near miss, we're going to have to prioritize things. And it's not, so I guess what we're saying is we're following how the United States basically looks at it, and the federal highway system looks at it as a safe system. And they're prioritizing deaths and severe industries because they have to prioritize something. They can't take care of everything at this point. So they're trying to get that to zero. Those are things like, we put in an intersection improvement as an example, and we put in a traffic roundabout. And one of the reasons roundabouts are really highly touted is not because they have zero accidents, but because if an accident occurs, the cars are moving a lot slower than if you have a green light in an intersection. So the type of accident tends to reduce serious injury, even though there may be, they're not zero accidents at roundabouts. So I think that's how the language is presented right now. We certainly could put the near misses in, but I just want to make sure we're clear on how we're going to prioritize.
So here's a scenario. We heard it today in the public comment. Somebody walks around all the time, and there's a crosswalk with nothing. And, sometimes you have to be careful as a pedestrian, for example, to cross that side as cars are zooming by. Sometimes you are lucky to do the Frogger thing. Sometimes you are not so lucky where you have a death or a severe injury, whatever it is. Like, why do we have to wait? I know that's how the United States defines it, and that's how. But why do we have to wait till something really bad happens if we know that something bad is going to happen eventually?
Right. But we're not going to wait because we are looking at systemic areas where they're likely to occur. And that's a combination of historic data that they've already occurred and just because of the type of geometry or, the type of road and crossing and that kind of thing. You don't have enough intersection crossing points along this arterial. So people start crossing in the middle of the street like Lake City Way. Those are the types of things that will pop up and get into priority, not just because they're near misses, but because there's more chance of there being not only a near miss, but a death or a serious fatality, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm not sure I'm saying
I think
that
we're saying the
correct.
same thing.
Yeah,
A near
okay.
miss will eventually lead, I might not get hit, but somebody else might get hit.
Yeah, and we'll certainly consider that. I mean, Jamal daily gets several things that he's looking at. I mean, even a city a size of 40,000, people are moving, things are happening. And so he addresses it continuously. And if we see something that comes across more than once, and it seems to be prevalent in that area, that certainly rises to a level of issue. And that, to me, probably would show up on the systemic one as well.
Yeah, we're saying that I'm using the terminology, you're using a different, it's the same
Right.
concept. So
Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay.
I wanted to add one bit of nuance to that. Totally appreciate it and the prioritization. I think what I have tried to advocate for, not today, but in other conversations, is instead of just reaching out to Jamal, a way for people to report those that's clear, that's offered very obviously when you go to the city website to be like, hey, this happened to me. Because I feel like having to go to a specific person and get in touch with them, like it's not hard to find a way to get in touch with Public Works and stuff, but I would love just a form or like, and I don't know how the app worked, I never used it, but like the city of Seattle had an app where you could just be like, here's a problem, let's fix it, just make it easy for people to reach out, lower the burden of who they have to find and how they get to them as much as possible, would be great too. Just as we collate that data, let's make it easy to give the data.
Yeah. So we do have an action request that basically is where most of his come through.
Okay.
And it's general things. I have a concern here, the light's not working, I almost got hit, this is not safe, all kinds of things come through that. So there is an action request, but we can certainly look at. To me, a big part of this is, like you said, engaging people and getting information, but it's also educating people as well. And part of the education could be, where do you go to report this kind of thing? And so we will look at that as a whole, I think.
Cool, thank you.
So I had a couple comments and a couple questions. One comment I wanted to make is on the safety portion. More and more we're finding the younger generations are starting to ride scooters and bicycles, and the way in which they ride those scooters and bicycles. So making sure that we're at least having that in our conversation. The modeling portion that we talked about earlier, I think would be important to do that on a more frequent basis, to just understand the flows and how the dynamic is changing throughout the community. I had a question on traffic calming roundabouts, and is there any information on them deterring pass-through, cut-through traffic?
I would have to do some research. I don't know if you know off the top of your head either.
Are you asking for like a traffic calming toolkit?
No,
with
more
strategies?
Yeah, you talk about it reduces the severity of an injury, right? Because vehicles are moving slower. But does those traffic calming medians or roundabouts, does it deter people from going that direction through traffic going through something, right? Wanting to take that road versus another road because it doesn't have it.
Comfort level.
Yeah.
Okay, we can look into that. We can try to find
It'd be interesting to see what that pass-through traffic looks like. You talked about, a project goes up 900 units, the impacts, potentially half a new traffic studies, things like that on the larger scale projects, right? When we talk about impacts across our city for smaller projects like the, affordable housing units, things like that, how do we, you know where I'm going with this. There's fees that are associated with those impacts. So how do we ensure that we keep it affordable, allow the affordability piece, not put that as much burden on it so that it reduces the effect of affordable housing, which becomes a subsidy, while allowing ourselves to collect the impacts because of the development, which is supposed to pay for the impact. There's a big question there for me on how we have that conversation.
I think that's going to be a discussion, and I think that's going to be a decision. I know Boyd Benson's looking at middle housing, and he's looking at fees, and not just in terms of transportation, but in terms of utilities and everything. I think there's a balance point where the city doesn't feel like it's losing headway by lowering the fee so much. But at the same time, I think if it's in the city's interest to provide affordable housing or provide middle housing even, two different things, it may want to make that decision. And it's got nothing to do with how much we're going to collect. As an example, there's senior discounts for certain things. So you make a decision that you're going to provide a senior discount. It's not really whether they're paying their way or not. It's probably more what's that percentage reduction, that it won't be such a huge hit, but it's sufficient enough to provide some sort of relief. So I think it's a balanced discussion, and it's not science. I think it's more going to be a discussion in an art form kind of thing.
No, I appreciate that, Steve. I think it is a discussion that we need to have. And again, there's many pieces that flow into, we talk about transportation, but there's a lot of elements that go into that as well around it, right? So what's driving the need for that? So I want to make sure that we're having a conversation on the impact to the community, and how we're structuring and ensuring that we're bringing the dollars back in through grant processes. So if we don't have opportunities for grants on some of the smaller projects because they're not as competitive, what mechanism are we using to pay for them to ensure they actually come to fruition, that we actually can do the project? So just want to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible when it comes to that. The other question I had is on so we talk a lot about roads and moving people on roads. Roads also have bridges, understanding the impacts on bridges and how we maintain and grant dollars that are available for bridges. And, we're obviously not widening too many bridges, but, and then Councilmember Mankey had brought up trails, I think earlier. He had made a comment about him and his son were riding and going from one part of the community to another part, and we're able to get on a trail, then get back off. And that opens up, some of the conversation we've had in the past where you have sidewalks that start and stop, right? And you have community members that are traveling on a what they feel is a somewhat safe roadway, or and then all of a sudden it's not safe anymore, and they haven't traveled that before, and so it's new to them. So ensuring that we're making sure that we don't have those start and stops, and or mainly just understanding how we're connecting the different types of access, right? Like if we've got to go from a trail to a street, what does that look like? Main arterial to a small side street, what does that look like? We talk a lot about safe streets to schools and things like that, but there's also just when we're not going to school, how are we getting around our community? And as Councilmember Mankey said, when he was a youngster, he wasn't allowed to ride a bike to his elementary school. Well, as a youngster, I was actually able to ride mine down to the slough and jump off the bridge into the slough when it was safe to swim in. So we did have to have the little orange flag up high on the little fiberglass antenna, but we're changing, right? And the means in which everyone in our community, from the youth to our seniors, is changing how they're moving around our community. And so just kind of understanding and making sure that we're looking out for that future, I think is important. So thanks.
Super quick, talking about traffic calming, I'm curious if there are any findings about how it worked for I think Conifer View neighborhood. Because I remember before and after, and I mean, I drive slower in that neighborhood, but I don't, did we ever measure anything and see how that worked out?
I would have to look at that. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. I would love to know that.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe Jenny has
I would like to see the data as well, but from lived experience, we still have traffic problems. One thing that would help in Conifer View is if there was a bollard stuck on the center median, because people drive over that in their high axle cars all the time, and they're going fast. So Bothell Police will often put out one of those speed checks and that says you're going too fast, you'll have to slow down. So yes, we do have traffic calming. That was a neighborhood-led effort, and we still have some improvements that we could make on that traffic calming. You got it.
Okay, I have two things. I don't know if this is the right time to talk about them or not. Have we looked at signal prioritization, leading pedestrian and bike intervals in the more crowded areas?
We are going to start to do that.
Cool.
Currently, right now in the downtown, what's kind of hung us up for a while, we just got done installing an adaptive signal system, and they had to go through a protocol X number of weeks. And unfortunately, in the middle of that, one of our conduits got hit. So we started all over again after we came up with a solution on how to fix that short term at least. So we will look at that. We are somewhat challenged on that side. That's the side where we lost our technician, so we actually have one traffic engineer trying to do all that stuff.
Okay.
So, but I think this fall, we're going to start that discussion. Yeah.
The other just more specific thing that might be too granular for this, but it's quick. Right turn on red. Is that something we've looked at disallowing in various parts of our city where we have more pedestrian activity?
I was just talking to him about that today. I think that's something in a toolbook we can look at. So again, I think there are places it's more appropriate than others, especially the downtown becoming as pedestrian as it is. Those are tools that we should be looking at. There are other areas in parts of town, unfortunately, like 228 and 527, where it's probably not a good idea at this point. We'd have to figure out how to mitigate some of the impacts of that if we were to do that. So I think it is on our toolkit, and I think it's something that we will look at.
Awesome. Thank you.
If we're just making wish list requests, can we, especially through downtown and some of our more high pedestrian areas, switch the signals to automatically give walk signals with it?
So you don't have to push the big button.
Yeah. So just, ending the big button. Like you're going to go, it's going to turn red and traffic's going to stop. And if you don't get I call it the walking man. I've called it the walking man since my kids were little. Anyway, if you don't get the walking man, you have to wait for the walking man. So could we just automatically get the walking man?
So let me put it this way. This fall, we'll start looking at the entire toolkit and seeing what we can and cannot do and how it would affect it. Again, right now, there are safety issues that we're dealing with, and from a resource issue, we're starting there, including some safety crossing issues that we have to clear up from timing point of view and those kind of things. Once those clear up, and I think in the fall we'll have a little bit more time, I think this is where we were trying to target some of these things. Yeah. Okay, so I think I can move on, and let's see if I can wrap up. I'm going to try to get through. I'm in the wrong place. Hang on. Yeah. So I guess what I would say is the last thing. We will take this back and we will look at our priorities and then try to collectively look at that. We're also going to probably go to the public with that. So through all that, these things might morph a little bit. We will come back in the fall. We will talk to you more about prioritization and everything. I think our next touch with you actually is July 25th. And we will talk to you a little bit about multimodal level of service and what staff is kind of leaning toward in terms of implementing that and how it would look. And we will talk a little bit more about that prioritization and how we will go through that. And that's what I have, and we have, and we really appreciate your input.
I was just going to say thanks. This has been really fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes back later this month or next month.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Council conversations.
I am dying to talk about the convention. And I would love to hear everybody else's high points. You want to humor me and hear my high points?
Can I make one unrelated point, and then we can dive in?
Sure.
I was going to say, when you talked about scooters and missing sidewalks, that is exactly what led to me to sort of somersault into injuring my knee a few weeks ago. So it's a good point. I wouldn't call myself a young person riding a scooter in a certain kind of way, but injury all the same. The convention was fun, though. Go ahead.
And there was also a coffee casualty, correct, on a
In
scooter?
Spokane, I may have dropped my coffee on a scooter, but that was not a personal injury. That was just a wallet injury.
That's a catastrophic injury. So I'll go fast, and then I want to hear what you guys, your takeaway on what you enjoyed on the convention as well. And you guys have got to go next time. It's in Vancouver, and I guess, Vancouver is going to be opening what it sounds like a PIBUS like is in Wenatchee. And I know, and I think they're going to be, they're going to have finished a year-round farmer's market that's going to be open, so that would be fun to see. So, at any rate, I did all the tours, and it was fascinating to watch. They had, and Ben, you can clarify where I get muddy on it. They had the school district, the city, the library, Gonzaga University, and the public facilities district do different projects where they work together on properties, sometimes land swapping, where the city would give the library some property and the library would give the city some property. Built these fantastic projects. One is the podium, another one, an arena that has like a world-class indoor track that pops up. We got to see the floor and how it works. That will never happen in Bothell. Huge, but it was fascinating to see. Stadium that they're working with between the city and the school district. A joint library. So for you guys who like the library, a joint library with the middle school because they want to find a way to get middle school kids to use the library more. So the library and the school district built a middle school and library together. And during the school hours, like a glass garage door comes down. So the middle school kids have access to a library on one side, and the public has library access on the other side. And then when school is out, that wall comes up, and public has. And then also in that land swap, the health district put a health clinic on a piece of property that was owned by the public utility district or something like that. So it really serves a community, a very tight community, really well. Another thing that I learned that they really impressed on us is that when you build amenities in a city, you really need tourism dollars to pay for the upkeep. That we were going through looking at all these things, and they said, and we need the tourism dollars. When we didn't have them during COVID, we really struggled to take care of this. So I thought, man, that's a lesson learned. And then they had a killer splash pad. For anybody who's into geology and Missoula flood, they had a splash pad that was vertical. Do you know about this, Nick? You do. It reenacts the Missoula flood. It's vertical, and so it starts spraying out mist first. And then it starts squirting out water, and then a wave of water comes over the top. Yes, across the playground, yeah. That was really cool to see. They had something called the Hive that we got to tour. That was joint between the library and school district, because the school district needs to use the classrooms for like 95 days of the year. They open up those rooms to the public for public use the other times. You just sign up and use it. And then they have an art incubator in the other half of the Hive. And so artists can come in and they can have it for weeks or months, and they can do their art in these, rooms that they have designated to themselves. They have glass windows so you can walk by and see what they're doing. And the agreement is they have to teach community classes for the use of the space, which is pretty cool. And then the other thing was Monica Guzman. Wow. Some of the comments that she made just really validated things that I've cared about, and I'm sure validated things that you've cared about. One of them was seeing things from different perspectives. I think I've mentioned before, I can describe this from this point of view, but you can see it from another point, and you can see that. She talked about that. And then she also talked about something that I have felt when you have people who are very divergent opinions on things, you also have a common ground that everybody shares. I think when I go out in the city and I talk with people of all political stripes, we all have common ground somewhere, and there's plenty of work to do in the common ground. That's a great way to build a cohesive community and less division, is finding that common ground. So anyway, I would love to hear what resonated with you from her. I loved her quote of Ed Prince, who said, "You got to be curious before you get furious." I thought that's a good quote to remember. So anyway, what did you guys come back with on the convention.
You forgot to mention that you got to go into a stormwater vault.
Oh, I forgot the stormwater vault. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Everybody's like, oh, thank you for mentioning that, Ben. So when they had the convention there a couple years ago, they had the road torn up. So half of Spokane feeds their stormwater in through their sewer, which you go, oh, stupid planning, but it's dry there most of the time. And the other half has stormwater and sewer separate. I want to say it is the north side that has it separate, but it's the south side of Spokane that just puts their stormwater in. And when I was there last time, they had the street torn up. They were building this huge, I can find out how many million, I think it's like 2-point-something million gallons of stormwater it can handle. And it was all dug up. This year, it's all park and street, and it looks pretty. We got to climb down into the stormwater retention pond, which was really, really cool. And we got to see mucky water on one side and clear, beautiful water on the other side. But I asked them, I said, and then what they do is they filter that stormwater into the sewer, and it goes through their sewer processing plant. And I said, what do you do about particulates like tire dust and oil? And they said, well, we're pretty sure that 99.9% of that is all filtered out before it goes into the sewer. As it's coming from the vault, it gets all filtered out before it goes to the sewer, which was super cool. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Councilmember Mankey, that can count toward your word allotment.
I was going to say, I'll keep mine short since I got Gene excited about something. I really like the splash pad. I mean, I'm crushing on their splash. They have 2 splash pads in their downtown park, one on one side of the river, one on the other. I mean, similar to our park down here, you wind up at the park. If you go toward the river, the park is all along the river. So you run right into like this cool river park. It's called Riverfront Park sign. And then there's a splash pad right there where people are playing. And then on the other side where the sports complex is, in addition to the Missoula flood splash pad and waterfall and other things, they also have some really cool accessible play equipment, as well as like a 3-story climbing and slide structure, which was pretty amazing. It didn't take up much space, but it was huge, and I just was imagining my kids being out there on it. So I think just a lot of cool things that we can do down here, and it just got me really excited for the possibilities and the visioning we're going to do, and including the community and seeing what they have in mind. There's so much we can do. So that was probably the highlight of my trip.
All of that stuff was very cool. I think I might be the last person to get to be in a stormwater vault, so I'm feeling a little left out because you got to go, well. But it was really great. I appreciated a lot of the sessions and just hearing from different speakers and different council members throughout the state. I think Ben and I both got to talk to someone about how annexation works outside of the GMA, which was just a fun little lesson, and a council member from Bothell. And yeah, it was really good. I really appreciated the opportunity.
I think like what you were getting at was my favorite part. This is going to be the ultimate extrovert answer right now. You meet a lot of folks in regional meetings and you make a lot of friends, and it's really fun to just go and have exposure to them for a few days straight, where you get to talk about different things that they're doing, and you can relate it back and forth to different opportunities and challenges you're having in your jurisdictions, and just the ability to go and talk with folks that are doing the same thing and being able to kick ideas around was a ton of fun. Had a really good time. And I'm, with enough parents of like school-age children here, I'm feeling much more optimistic about a splash pad than I was a few years ago.
So question, Mason, would you do it again?
Yeah.
Would you take vacation time for it?
Yeah.
Good.
I'm looking forward to next year.
I was really disappointed that my family couldn't join me out on that trip because we'd been looking for an excuse to explore Spokane together. But I still had a great time without kids around. And I'd say Well, so I also serve on the Legislative Priorities Committee. I'm in my second year of a 2-year term, and we got to meet in person this time. And being around that room together, actually, you would think that I would have figured this out before, but being in person meant that it was easier for me to see who else from North King County was on that committee. So we have David Baker from Kenmore and Chris Roberts from Shoreline. And it was sort of like, oh, hey, North King County, like, let's connect. And had some really great conversations. There were several times when in the course of a presentation that I would bring up the RACER program and the North King County efforts on crisis response, and people were so receptive to it. And they say, how do I learn more? I want to learn more. And I'm getting emails from people that somebody asked me to share Councilmember Srebnick's white paper on crisis response. And there are people all over the state that are looking to us to say, how do we do that? And
we got stopped multiple times. They would see Bothell on our name tag and be like, oh, you guys have that thing. And so I was like, yes, you should talk to Jenny. And I did talk to them, but yeah, I name dropped you many times.
Those folks were from like.
They might have been hearing it from me and wanted to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're from Twist, like super tiny town.
Oh.
They had heard of what.
Yeah. We're totally talking on email.
Yeah.
Like those conversations are continuing.
Great.
And some of those connections have been really, really valuable, I think, to be able to share that information out, especially as we're talking about, what are our legislative priorities coming up and how do we continue building on the work that we've already done here in North King County. And people are like, well, so you are there, but like, how do we get where you are? And that was great. Also, I'm just going to put a little note in saying that for whatever reason, AWC is really good at scheduling these events on minor holidays, Valentine's Day and the solstice. And that solstice is interesting, but we got to spend it in an outdoor bar patio while the sun set, and it was just during the DEIB mixer, and it was just the most pleasant evening I had enjoyed in a very long time without my family. And I had really enjoyed it and looking forward to it again. And I need to spend more time in Spokane.
And we're going to see each other the 4th of July. Isn't that like next week? In the parade? Yeah.
My kids are excited. My kids are so introverted and so like homebodies that it was really cool to hear them how cared for they felt by city staff last year, and how they're willing to put themselves out there again and participate in the parade. And I'm really, really encouraged by that. Looking forward to it.
Mine's only going because I told him that Kyle said that he could ride inside the fire truck if it's too intimidating being on top of it.
Can he drive it?
No, I'm going to say no to that one.
Can I drive?
He's going to get a hat though, right? He'll have the hat in the fire truck?
We will find out.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Pierce wears his hat from last year all the time. I
Yes.
just want to point that out.
So I'm excited to hear the conversation around the table today, and the relationships and things that you guys are building outside in the region. But today I want to talk about something that is disturbing to me because of the focus that we have on DEI and listening and understanding where people are coming from. And during our retreat, we had a very open and robust conversation. And today there was a decision that was made to move us around our seats. And that decision was made without having a conversation as a whole. And why it's disturbing to me is because I didn't have an opportunity to say how I feel about where I sit. And I sit amongst 6 council members that were elected by the city that have told me since they've been on council that DEI is important to them. And today, I feel like the move was made without an open discussion, without everybody participating in the discussion. And I feel like I'm being put somewhere without having my voice heard. And hopefully you'll understand that there's a process that has taken place by past council that I've been part of, where there's seating orders that are, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, and if mayor's sitting in the middle, it's divvied up. But that conversation never took place. Seats were moved. And as a person of color that is now sitting in a different place than they were before, I feel offended by that. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys hear me loud and clear that I respect the decisions were made and we have a protocol manual, but sometimes our protocol manual doesn't take into consideration the things that we as a council say that we want it to take into consideration. And that's having an open discussion with all of us who look at things through a different lens. So I wanted to make sure I raised that with you guys tonight. Hopefully we can have a further discussion on where the seats are going to be and an open discussion that everybody can participate in. So not one person feels like they've been left out of that conversation or not at least had their voice heard before they've been told where they're going to sit.
I wanted to thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate the bravery that it takes to speak up, especially when you feel that you haven't been heard, to then take another step to be heard. So thank you very much. I think this question, I'm not sure who this question is for, but when would we have that discussion as a council? Would we use council conversations for that? Would we have time set on an agenda?
I'll, even on council conversations, I am at the table. That is an opportunity, right? That council conversations, I think, does give you the opportunity to have conversations that are things that are not scheduled and from a time standpoint and all of that. We have 3 more meetings before our recess, and then we'll note too from a process standpoint. There was a number of things that were talked about in the council retreat around council process, meeting management, and things that have to come back in the protocol manual to clean up based on what the council wants to do. I only raised that in that as the city clerk and I have been talking about when to bring that back. We've been targeting the September 5th meeting. And since it's council conversations, I'll tell you the informal reason why is that the Tuesday after Labor Day is not always the easiest day to get materials in the council packet and to make sure that people are around. So when the city clerk and the city manager get together and think about like, well, how are we going to make sure we have something on that agenda? That was a good date to do it. So that's our intention there. So I think there's further conversation there, but I do think, in terms of the council manual, there is an aspect of mayor needing, somebody has to set the seating chart that goes to the mayor with consultation from the council, and the only way to have consultation from the council is during meetings. So to get all 7 voices, that's a long way of saying I think there's an interim step of council conversations certainly works. Staff will probably be more silent than I am right now, and also then remembering too that if there's from a process standpoint, Councilmember McNeil brings a good point of you as a council have had a conversation about how do you want to work together, and the council protocol manual doesn't reflect some of those things. So we do need to get back to that as well. So short-term, long-term, maybe neither of those are long-term after we just talked about the comp plan, but yeah, there's 2 opportunities.
I would love to know, and thank you for sharing, Councilmember McNeil, because it certainly wasn't my intent to offend anybody by moving seats around. And since we're here, like, I would just love to know, is there something specific about the last seat you were sitting in that you liked, the seat that you're in now that you don't like? Are there different seats that you would find acceptable? And I guess I'd love to know how I can make this work better for you.
I think the reason I bring it up is it's more of a process, right? Like having a conversation, so no surprises, don't move things around, don't make changes without everybody's voice at the table. And so I think that's the main point, right? I could care less where I sit pretty much, but I want to be part of the process of what that change is. So it's a pretty dramatic change of where you're sitting on the dais, who you're interacting with, just the focus, right? And we're all 7 of us here together, right? And so I feel we should all have part of that conversation. Ultimately, the decision is the mayor's, yes, 100%. But again, if we really want to talk about inclusiveness and making sure people's voices are heard, we'll take that leadership and run with it ourselves as a council and make sure that we're ensuring that even in these some of these things that we're doing, moving people around, we're looking at it through everybody's lens, which we said we wanted to do.
Absolutely. Is there I know that we look at the protocol manual on a fairly regular basis. This sounds like something that kind of escaped us the last time that we talked through the protocol manual in terms of something that was important. Is that something that's on the schedule for us coming up too soon?
Yeah, there's a log of changes that need to be contemplated, and both things that have already been brought up or things that need to be discussed. And again, when I say things that have been brought up, like you would see them in red line of here's what we think that we heard. But the city clerk does keep a list of those things and what we need to revisit so that when we open it, we recognize that it's really core foundational work and also not the business that the council wants to take up every week. So when we tend to have a conversation about protocol manual, try and make it as comprehensive as possible.
Perfect. It sounds like Councilmember McNeil he said he doesn't really care where he sits up there. It's more just the process thing. So it seems like a really good thing to look at the next time we have the protocol manual up and figure out kind of what that process looks like and go from there. And hopefully we can have an environment where everybody feels heard all the time and we can leave a protocol manual that will leave us in a better place than we were left for that.
Yeah, I think we should still have the conversation now about what former councils have done, seating arrangements, why we sit to where we sit. I think we should have that conversation, open dialogue. So
what do you want to do?
I'd love to have that conversation in a future meeting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Not now.
No, not
okay.
No. Okay. Future meeting, at least open up the dialogue to what councils have done in the past and do some conversation around it. Yeah.
Sounds like a good after Labor Day conversation.
Does it matter? The seating. I mean, I understand the process, but like, what's the purpose of moving seats around? I guess, and like, is that the most important decisions we're gonna? Sorry, I'm a more of a big decision kind of guy. Like, is this the more important thing we can discuss?
I mean, if I would have realized how important it was, I probably would have handled it a little bit differently. Like I'm kind of with you. I didn't see it as being super important, but it's something that we talked about and we figured we'd just do.
Well,
it's fair to talk about it.
Yeah.
It is just, just curious. Why is it, I guess, the impact? I'm new to the whole government thing. What's the impact of moving seats around?
So we're with all due respect, we're referring to how I feel. I shared how I feel about something. We don't have to have this discussion. I shared to this council how I felt about something. I put myself out. I'm vulnerable about it. And letting you know that as this council's had conversations since our retreat, one of our number one priorities has been DEI and inclusiveness and having open dialogue and conversations with people of color and those within our community. And this specific thing bothers me because there was never a discussion by this council about moving seats around. Today we received an email and seats were moved around. And I didn't have an opportunity to say how I felt about where I was sitting or conversations about what the past councils have done and how we've come up with seating arrangements based on where we are on the dais. And I've been here 8 years, and those conversations have always been open between the councils, and this is the first time a decision has been made without any discussion. So I felt it was important, and I feel a specific way. You're going to feel a specific way.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I am not diminishing what you're saying because you thought it was important. I honestly, yes, like put me in, to me, it's not about what's important, what's not important, but if we identified an issue right now and we're going to be fixing it in the unless you want to revisit the seating arrangement and have things shuffled again. That's my question. Are we going to have that?
Yeah, I think my point for bringing this up, Deputy Mayor, is that I do want to have a conversation, regardless of how the seating arrangement works. That's a decision the council will make. But I do want to at least have the opportunity to have my voice heard before a decision like that is made. That's all.
No, and that's what I was going to say is I think it's easy to think it's just where you sit. But I think anyone, and when it affects somebody and makes them feel not heard, then obviously it is very important. I think anyone who's worked in a small office environment knows that there's a lot of nuance in where you sit. And so I think the one thing that the next time we talk about this is to remember is the seven of us can't talk unless it's an open public meeting, even about seating, and people might have different concerns that are hard to address in that setting. So if we can craft some kind of policy that respects all of these different angles, that lets us have open conversation, but also with the understanding that it's live broadcast. And, you might want to say that I'm not even going to come up with a fake example. But just, I think that it's a very nuanced thing to talk about, especially as different interpersonal relationships come into play. And so it's a difficult conversation, and we're all going to have to evolve with it. So I really appreciate you bringing it up, and having this conversation and starting this dialogue right now, because there's a lot that goes into it.
Can I jump in? The first issue, the main issue is changes were made and we weren't part of the conversation. That's a big deal. And, and for some people who are just grateful for a chair to sit in, I get that. I just have to tell you, I know the history of some of the history of hearing council members when there's, new electeds coming in, and people, it's important to people how they sit and who they sit next to. Not to everybody, but it is important. And so on a few levels, one, just having the respect of having a conversation, and two, seating does matter to some people. So
Is there a seat you would prefer to sit in? Is there a better seat?
I actually like that seat right there where Laura is. No, actually, I just love, there's benefits to every seat. I like sitting down here because it's near these guys. I like sitting near these guys down this direction because it's near where Laura is. Put somebody friendly next to me. I'm happy. Yeah.
Not
Amanda?
Yeah.
No, no, she lets me have leg space underneath the dais, so that's perfect. That's my criteria. Do you
Yeah,
let
not
me
one of
have
you
room
tall
for my
people.
feet?
Jean wants to sit next to the short council members.
So when do we want to have the conversation again? It has to be in public, obviously. Or is there another mechanism? I don't know. I'm not the legal expert in this.
I think it might make sense to let staff help us with the process that respects how intricate these conversations can be, while also respecting all of the rules that we are held to as public officials who can't talk to each other outside of this context. I don't know that we're going to solve how best to have those conversations like right now.
I mean,
I don't think we solve them right now. We have processes in which we can have these conversations, and I want this to be the last thing that happens like this. Like I want this to be an example moving forward, that we open up a dialogue and feel comfortable enough with each other that when things like this come up, we can all be part of the conversation. That's the main purpose for this, right? So I could have just let it go, but I want this to set the tone. Like, we are focused on DEI. Let's make sure we're focused on DEI. We're focused on hearing everyone. Let's focus on hearing everyone. It doesn't matter if it's about seating arrangements. That's just one piece. Everything that we do, this has to be embedded in. That's what each and every single one of you told me and told us as a council that you took a priority with. So I just want to make sure that we're taking it serious.
So do you want to have another conversation around the seating arrangement? Is that something we should put on an agenda item up in the future? Because
in the future, yeah, for sure.
Okay, like in the near future, because I hear from you that it's a process thing that happened, and I hear that and I understand that. If it's a process thing that happened that was wrong, like, we fix that by fixing the process. If it's a seating arrangement thing, we fix that by talking about the seating arrangement. So I guess, like, is the seating arrangement something you want to address, or is the process something you want to address? Because I hear different things and I'm not sure.
I want to go back to doing both because they're both related. I want to have the conversation about seating.
Okay.
Right? I want to hopefully fix, if there is an issue and this council decides to do something differently with the protocol manual because it opens itself up for perception or someone to feel not included. I want to look at that, right? So the conversation doesn't need to take place tonight. I think it needs to be a more formal conversation because I think it's going to lead to us taking good action for future things that are going to come up throughout the protocol manual, not just this specific thing. So we're not going to solve this tonight. I don't want to solve it tonight. But yes, this is the first step. have the conversation about the seating, then see how it goes.
Okay.
Then look at the protocol manual in the future. And, yeah.
So for now, the more immediate step is that we'd put an item on the agenda at a future meeting to talk about which seats we sit in, correct?
Have an open conversation about it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is a great lesson learned, too. And if we can figure out a way to label having a misstep where we're not bringing everybody in on the conversation, call it the great seating faux pas or something like that.
So
Hindsight, this is going to be a very relaxed situation to have a misstep. And I think it is a great learning opportunity for us to be more cognizant of other situations down the road and being more circumspect about them. Does that make sense?
I'd like to point out that according to current policies, there is nothing untoward that has occurred. We are not allowed to break quorum on items related to public business. Quorum was not broken. And the current manual says that it is up to the mayor's discretion. And the mayor acted according to his discretion with the information that he had received. And I do not find it appropriate to find fault in people who are following protocol and who are not doing anything that is like to accuse people of misstepping when protocol is being followed. I have a problem with that. And we've encountered situations like that before. Now, if you don't like how the current protocols exist, we can talk about changing future protocols in the future. But finding fault in keeping to protocol is a problem, and I don't think we should continue allowing that to occur.
I think that's the point, is embedded in what we've got going on, using our protocol manual as an example, is situations where people are not heard and should have been heard, and we need to have some foresight and some planning ahead on it. I think that's the point.
it sounds like we know what we all collectively missed the last time we talked about the protocol manual.
And I think I would add one note. This is a little meta, but if we were all excellent to each other in all circumstances, this wouldn't be a complicated conversation.
And I actually would think that it's not going to be a complicated conversation. But I would say that the thing that comes to mind the most in this conversation right here is we had an opportunity to have a conversation before we changed something. There's nothing saying we couldn't have. So that's the part that hurts me the most, is that, and this is no reflection on any one council member, any one person that made a decision or not made a decision. This is me saying that something affected me. I think we talked about in the retreat, if something is affecting you, you say something, and I'm saying something to the council, and I think it's something we can improve on.
Do you have a seat preference? Like, is there one that would make you the happiest?
No, again, like
Okay.
I said, I just want to have a conversation. Like in the future, I think enough has been said tonight. I think I feel that everybody kind of understands where I'm coming from with this. There's no me pointing the finger and trying to say somebody did something wrong. I'm telling you how I feel. And if people want to misconstrue how I feel, that's fine, but I'm telling you how I feel tonight. And so, just like I did in the retreat. And so, you can take it how you want to take it. But again, it's not attacking or saying anything negative about anybody. I'm saying there's something that I feel we can make better. And I know that each and every one of you have looked me in the eye and said that this is important to you. DEI is important. We made it a priority to hire somebody to take care of it for us, and I'm bringing it to your attention.
I'd also like to add that professional and humane conduct is a necessary part of our interactions as a council. And when people violate that, there are consequences. And sometimes we live with the consequences of that.